Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight's story, we're diving into lore of the Marines Malevolent. Before we get into the madness, as always, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe for the Emperor. Now, I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it. Now, let's get to the madness.
Armageddon burned beneath him, not as a world burned. Worlds were abstractions on void charts, dull spheres marked by kill runes and tithe values, their continents reduced to color-coded zones of compliance, resistance, contamination, or loss. Armageddon burned as a continental furnace, as a wound in the void, as an industrial altar upon which mankind fed itself to war and called the smoke devotion. From orbit, its hive spires were not cities. They were pyres. Hades' hive rose through the ash murk like the blackened ribs of a dead god, its towers clawing upward through storm belts thick with soot, promethium vapor, and pulverized bone. Fire moved along its terraces in veins. Macro-cannon impacts had gouged entire districts from its skin. Hab blocks collapsed in slow avalanches of ferrocrete and bodies. Manufactoria vomited smoke, despite having no living overseers left within them, their machine spirits too stubborn or too maddened to accept the silence of their crews. The ash wastes surrounding the hive were alive with motion. Tank columns crawled and died beneath yellow clouds. Orc engines, vast and crude and belching black flame, advanced over minefields by the thousands, detonating their own kind with laughter loud enough to be heard across open vox bands. Imperial artillery answered from behind curtain walls of wreckage, each barrage shaking the land until ruined hab domes broke apart and buried the wounded before they could be counted. Orbital debris rained down in streaks of iron light. Dead voidcraft, broken munitions satellites, shattered drop pods, and the dismembered bones of escort ships fell through the upper atmosphere, becoming meteors of imperial failure. Some struck the wasteland, some struck the hives, some broke apart in red showers over refugee columns and armored reserves alike, indifferent in their descent. On the strategium slate before Inquisitor Halvek Mordain, the billions were cleaner. They were numerals, though his scribes had been ordered never to show him numerals without names attached. They were casualty projections, labor reserves, evacuation failures, combat-effective population remnants, and corpse recycling potential. Hades' hive and the settlements under its shadow had once held more souls than many subsectors. Now those souls had become little blocks of data, each icon shrinking as the hours passed. The slate rendered extinction with admirable precision. Halvek disliked that, not because he was sentimental. Sentiment was for priests, widows, and men who had not watched a loyal world consume itself in the name of survival. He disliked the cleanliness of it. He disliked how easily horror became legible when placed beneath glass. The shuttle shook as it entered the strike cruiser's embarkation cradle. The vessel waiting above Armageddon was named Purgatory. Halvek had seen black ships less hostile to life. The strike cruiser hung in low orbit, scarred from prow to stern, its armor plates mismatched and ugly with battlefield repair. Its flanks bore the sunburst yellow of the Marines Malevolent, though the color had been darkened by old re-entry scorching and fresh void battle grime. Its cathedral spires were blunt, many sheared away. Weapon batteries squatted behind plates that had been harvested from other vessels. Some still bore the ghosted heraldry of previous owners, scraped down but not entirely erased. The ship did not seem maintained so much as restrained from falling apart by hatred and habit. Halvek's shuttle locked with a metallic shriek. The docking claws bit hard enough to make the hull groan. His stormtroopers rose as one, hellguns mag-locked across their breastplates, carapace armor marked by the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus. None spoke. They were good men. That meant they feared the right things, and hid it well. The hatch opened. Cold air entered the shuttle. It stank of machine oil, recycled blood, incense burned too often in dirty censers, and the stale animal reek of warriors sealed too long inside warplate. A squad of space marines waited beyond the threshold. They were immense in the gloom. Their armor was sunburst yellow beneath layers of soot, dried gore, and battlefield dust. Silver aquilus hung across their chests, dulled by smoke and stained at the edges where blood had dried in old grooves. Some wore Mark 6th Corvus helms with long, beaked faceplates, the old patterns patched with scavenged ceramite of different shades and different chapters, repainted badly or not at all. One pauldron bore a plate that had once been green. Another showed the scars where a different sigil had been gouged away with a combat blade. Their bolters were relics, not because they had been venerated, but because they had survived long enough to become ancient. Their casings were chipped. Their grips were wrapped in worn leather. Their barrels were blackened from use beyond sanctioned replacement cycles. They looked less like angels than munitions given hatred and anatomy. At their head stood Captain Vineyard. He did not bow. He did not incline his head. He did not remove his helm. His lenses burned red in the dimness. "Inquisitor Halvek Mordain," said the captain, his voice issuing from his vox grill as iron dragged across stone. "You are late." Halvek stepped onto the deck of Purgatory. His rosette hung openly at his throat. It had opened doors across the segmentum solar. It had condemned governors, silenced cardinals, and made lord generals kneel in their own command bunkers. On this ship, beneath these red lenses, it felt very small. "I arrive by mandate of the Holy Ordos," Halvek said. "You will address that mandate with the respect owed to his Inquisition." Vineyard looked down at him. The motion was slow, almost curious. "I address threats," said the captain. "Mandates do not bleed." One of Halvek's stormtroopers shifted his grip by a finger's width. Every bolter in the docking bay turned toward him with the smoothness of execution machinery. Halvek lifted one hand. His men froze. "I am not here to trade intimidation with you, Captain." "No," Vineyard said. "You are here to measure the dead and decide whether they died correctly." The words traveled through the bay like a blade drawn from a sheath. Halvek let the silence endure. He had learned, across long decades, that the first man to hurry in a chamber of killers had already surrendered part of himself. "You were ordered to preserve the Emperor's Deliverance refugee camp until evacuation could be completed. We preserved Hades' hive. You bombarded Imperial civilians. We bombarded orcs. With Imperial civilians inside the target zone, their presence altered nothing." A lesser man would have raised his voice. Halvek did not. "You will make a formal apology to the surviving command staff and submit yourself to inquiry." For the first time, something like amusement entered Vineyard's posture. It was not warmth. It was not humor. It was the shift of a predator that had discovered its prey believed itself dangerous. "I will not kneel," Vineyard said. "I will not apologize. You misunderstand your position." "No, Inquisitor. You misunderstand war." Vineyard leaned closer, armor servos growling under his movement. "Mercy is a resource. We spent ours 10,000 years ago." The Marines Malevolent escorted him through arteries of black iron. Purgatory did not have corridors so much as wounds connecting organs of war. Every passage was narrow by Astartes standards and cavernous by human ones. Servo skulls drifted in alcoves, their brass eye lenses flickering as they tracked Halvek's party. Chapter serfs moved with their heads bowed, dragging ammunition crates and bundles of scavenged cabling. Many bore burns. Some had augmetic limbs crudely fitted. None met the eyes of the stormtroopers. None looked at the space marines at all. In the strategium, Halvek was shown the truth as the chapter wished to present it. The chamber was a cathedral of calculation. Hollow projectors cast Armageddon in fractured green light above a circular table of cracked adamantium. Around it stood captains, sergeants, a tech marine whose red plate had been repainted only where doctrine demanded, and servitors wired into cogitator banks through spine and skull. Old blood marked the floor grates. New blood dripped through them from the boot of a Marine who had not bothered to clean his greave. Vineyard stood opposite Halvek, helm still sealed. "Play the picked captures," Halvek ordered. His auto-savant, a hunched man named Gethro, plugged a data spike into the strategium's unwilling machine spirit. The chamber lights dimmed, the air filled with the flicker of recorded atrocity. Emperor's deliverance appeared. The refugee camp had been raised in the lee of a broken manufactorum district, a sprawl of canvas. Shelters, medici tents, ration queues, crude shrines, and defense lines manned by exhausted guardsmen. Its name had been painted across a gate made from tank wreckage and prayer boards. The picked feed shook as Orc artillery began landing beyond the perimeter. Each explosion threw up fountains of mud, fire, and limbs. Men ran through smoke carrying stretchers. Vox channels overlapped in panicked layers. Pleas for ammunition, pleas for medicae, pleas for evacuation, pleas to the throne. Then the Orcs came. They hit the perimeter like a green tide of muscle, rust, and teeth. Crude rockets screamed overhead. Choppers rose and fell. Guardsmen vanished beneath hacking blades. Heavy stubbers cut Orcs apart, and the Orcs laughed as they died, trampling their own dead into the wire. A mob smashed through the western barricade, dragging defenders apart in sprays of meat and flak armor. Refugees surged away from the breach, a mass of ash-grey faces and open mouths. The picked feed caught a priest standing on a supply crate, screaming a hymn while an Orc round tore through his abdomen and emptied him down the front of his robes. Halvek watched Vineyard. The captain did not watch the civilians. He watched the enemy movement. Targeting runes appeared across the picked. Imperial life signs filled the camp. Thousands, tens of thousands. The whirlwind batteries on the ridge above had locked onto the coordinates. A Vox recording crackled through the strategium. "Confirmed target saturation," said a voice Halvek recognized as Vineyard's. Another voice, human, shaking with terror. "My lord, the camp is still occupied. Imperial signatures remain within the strike grid." "Confirmed," Vineyard answered. "My lord, they are our own." "No," said Vineyard. "They are bait." The first missiles fell. The picked capture whited out. When it returned, Emperor's deliverance was being erased. Whirlwind rockets walked across the camp in disciplined patterns. Fire blossomed among tents. Bodies burst beneath shrapnel. Orcs vanished in chunks, torsos opening, skulls pulping, limbs torn away in spinning arcs. Humans died the same way. Shelters collapsed into burning cloth and screaming flesh. Medici wards became craters. The gate bearing the camp's holy name flipped end over end before smashing into a mob of greenskins and refugees alike. A man crawled across the mud without legs, dragging entrails behind him like prayer ribbons, until a second detonation reduced him to spray. The picked ended. No one in the chamber spoke. Halvek felt the pressure of his own heartbeat. He had witnessed exterminatus. He had ordered purges. He had seen cult worlds burned from orbit, while their populations sang to things beneath the skin of reality. Yet there was something uniquely obscene in the calm of this room, in the stillness of these yellow-armored warriors who watched the slaughter of the helpless, as if reviewing ammunition expenditure. "You saw the life signs," Halvek said. "Yes." "You heard the requests for delay." "Yes." "You could have extracted more of them." "No." Halvek's gaze hardened. "That is a lie." Vineyard turned his head. Several helms turned with him. The air tightened. The captain spoke softly. That made it worse. "The weak who cannot defend the Imperium are already a liability. The dying who slow the advance of the strong are a hindrance. The helpless who draw the enemy into a kill zone are useful at last. We do not mourn ammunition when it is spent to purpose." A human colonel standing near the table went pale. He had been introduced as the surviving liaison of a Cadian-derived regiment, though his uniform was so torn and burned that only the posture remained military. "They were citizens of the Imperium," the colonel said. A sergeant of the Marines Malevolent turned toward him. This warrior wore a corvus helm, split by a vertical scar across the beak, repaired with black bonding metal. His left pauldron was not the same yellow as the rest of his armor. The plate had been taken from another suit and repainted in haste. A chain of spent shell casings hung from his belt beside a combat blade whose edge was dark with old use. "Citizens," he said. "No, they will wait." Vineyard did not reprimand him. Halvex studied the sergeant. "Your name?" "Turok," the warrior replied. "Sergeant, 3rd Tactical. You were present at Emperor's deliverance." "I was blessed with useful work." The colonel's jaw trembled. "Useful work? You butchered men who trusted you." Turok's helm angled down. "Guardsmen, your kind exist to stand where we place you, die when required, and hold long enough for victory to become possible. Sandbags bleed. That is the only distinction." The colonel reached for his sidearm. He did not draw it. Halvex's hand closed around his wrist first. "Do not," the Inquisitor said. The colonel's eyes were wet with rage. "My lord, they killed my regiment." "No," said Turok. "The orcs killed your regiment. We made the deaths profitable." The first orc shell struck the command precinct below them less than a minute later. The strategium lurched. The hollow map broke into static. One of the servitors screamed as its cranial plugs overloaded and fire jetted from its mouth. The second shell hit closer, and the far wall burst inward in a storm of metal, stone, and pressure. Human officers became red mist against the cogitator banks. A scribe folded backward around a shard of adamantium that punched through his chest and pinned him to a pillar. The colonel, who had nearly drawn his pistol, vanished from the waist up, his legs standing for a heartbeat before collapsing into the spreading ruin of him. Halvek hit the floor hard. His refractor field flared, crackling gold as fragments lashed across it. One of his stormtroopers took a piece of shrapnel through the throat seal and died drowning inside his helm. Another was thrown against the table, armor cracked, ribs crushed inward. Gethro, the auto-savant, clung to his data slate and shrieked binary prayers in a voice that had forgotten human language. The Marines Malevolent did not hurry. That was the worst of it. They moved as if the bombardment had merely confirmed an appointment. Vineyard turned toward the ruined wall. Turok racked his bolter. Other warriors stepped through smoke and falling dust, their boots crushing bone fragments and cogitator glass with equal indifference. Warning klaxons began to howl. The Vox filled with layered reports from the surface. Outer precinct breached. Greenskin artillery walking fire across the eastern bastion. Command spine compromised. Enemy infantry entering through the shell wound. By the throne, they are inside. Something huge bellowed beyond the broken wall. An orc knob came through the smoke, broader than a cargo hauler's engine block, its armor a welded shrine of scrap plates, imperial helmets, and dangling severed hands. It carried a cleaver made from a tank hatch. Its jaw was iron. Its eyes burned with stupid joy. "Humies!" it roared. "Yellow Humies!" Turok fired first. The bolter's report was a flat thunderclap. The shell struck the knob in the chest and detonated beneath the armor, punching meat and metal outward. The orc staggered, laughing through blood. More greenskins poured behind it, firing from the hip, slugs chewing through consoles and bodies. One stormtrooper vanished beneath 3 orcs and kept firing until a chopper split his helm and scattered his brains across the deck. Vineyard advanced. His sword came free with a hiss of oiled metal, not a relic blade shining with noble light, a workman's weapon, a butcher's weapon. The captain met the knob halfway across the shattered chamber. The cleaver came down. Vineyard took the blow on his pauldron, ceramite cracking. He stepped in close and drove his blade up beneath the orc's jaw, through tongue, iron teeth, and skull. The point burst from the top of the greenskin's head in a spray of dark blood and brain matter. Vineyard twisted once, hard, then tore the weapon free. The knob collapsed. Vineyard walked over it before it finished twitching. Halvek rose amid smoke and screams, drawing his inferno pistol. He fired once, reducing an orc's face to a molten hollow. The creature ran 3 steps without a head before falling. His remaining stormtroopers formed around him, disciplined despite the carnage. Good men, still. Dying men, soon. Across the chamber, a wounded guardsman crawled from beneath a fallen beam. His uniform was aflame at the shoulder. One leg dragged uselessly behind him, twisted backward. He clawed toward the Marine's Malevolent, leaving a shining red smear on the deck. "My lord," he gasped. "Evacuation. Please. I can still serve. Please." Vineyard looked down at him. For one heartbeat, Halvek thought the captain had not heard. The guardsman's body lay across the entrance to a firing alcove overlooking the breach. His presence blocked the angle by a few degrees. An orc heavy weapon team was setting up beyond the smoke, crude gun shields scraping sparks from the floor. Vineyard raised his bolt pistol. The guardsman lifted one hand. "My lord, I beg you." Vineyard shot him through the skull. The body dropped flat. The firing lane cleared. Vineyard stepped over the corpse, braced his pistol, and fired 3 times. The orc gunner burst apart behind its shield, its chest cavity opening in wet chunks. The loader beside it lost both arms and spun screaming into the breach. Halvek stared at the guardsman's remains, not because death shocked him. Death was the currency of the age. He stared because there had been no anger in the execution, no irritation, no cruelty savored for its own sake, only correction. The man had obstructed a line of fire. Vineyard had removed the obstruction. Tuarok's squad pushed into the broken corridor beyond the strategium. Bolters roared in disciplined bursts. Orcs died messily, violently, gloriously, as their kind deserved. Shells punched through green muscle and detonated within. Heads burst, spines snapped, arms spun away, trailing cables of tendon. Astartes' boots crushed skulls, still trying to bite. One orc slammed into Tuarok, driving a jagged blade into his breastplate. The sergeant caught the creature by the throat, head-butted it hard enough to cave in its face, then fired his bolter point-blank into its abdomen until the beast came apart in sections. The Marine's Malevolent advanced through the carnage without battle cries. That too, Halvek marked. The Black Templars roared oaths. The Space Wolves laughed and cursed like murder made myth. The Ultramarines issued commands with perfect clarity. The Salamanders spoke of protection even while burning their enemies alive. The Marines Malevolent simply prosecuted death. Their silence was not discipline alone. It was contempt. The enemy did not deserve fury. Their allies did not deserve reassurance. The dead did not deserve witness. When the last orc in the chamber died, it died under Vineyard's boot, its skull breaking like wet stone beneath yellow ceramite. Smoke drifted through the strategium. Bodies lay everywhere. Human dead in pieces, orc dead in heaps. Servitors crawled in circles, dragging loops of their own cables and exposed intestine, still attempting to obey orders that no longer existed. One of Halvek's stormtroopers knelt beside a dying comrade and pressed a gauntlet to the wound, though the blood pulsing between his fingers made the gesture meaningless. Vineyard turned back to the Inquisitor. "You have seen our doctrine under fire," he said. Halvek holstered his pistol. His face had become a mask. "I have seen enough to condemn you. You have seen enough to understand why you cannot." The captain walked past him. His armor brushed Halvek's shoulder, heavy as a closing vault. "Continue your inquiry, Inquisitor. Count the corpses. We will make more." Hours later, in a chamber assigned to him by warriors who trusted locks less than fear, Halvek stood over Gethro's shaking form as the auto-savant worked. The man had survived the bombardment with a torn ear, a broken hand, and a splinter of metal lodged in the meat below his eye. He had refused medici attention until the data spike was recovered. Halvek approved of him for that. Pain could wait. Truth could not. The chamber's walls hummed with the pulse of the ship. Somewhere distant, macro cannons fired into the ash-choked atmosphere. Each discharge trembled through the deck like the heartbeat of a sleeping monster. Gethro's fingers clicked across the slate keys. Blood dripped from his bandaged hand onto the console. "The gene tithe records are intentionally degraded," the auto-savant whispered. "Layered redactions, administratum seals, mechanicus counterseals, ordo locks over ordo locks. Someone buried the provenance, my lord." "Who?" "I cannot yet say." "Then say what you can." Gethro swallowed. His throat clicked around old augmetics. "The chapter's declared origin is unknown, as recorded. Founding uncertain. Primarch lineage absent. Gene seed purity assessments inconsistent. Several submissions routed through dead archives. Several more through vaults that should not exist." Halvek leaned closer. "Show me." The auto-savant turned the slate. Lines of high Gothic crawled across the cracked glass, resolving through corruption and static. Much was blacked out. Much was sealed beyond even Halvek's rosette. But one fragment remained beneath a hidden administratum cipher, old enough that its formatting predated half the living institutions of the Imperium. Gethro's voice became very small. "My lord." Halvek read the words. For the first time since boarding Purgatory, the Inquisitor felt cold. Legionary source. Redacted. Beneath it, flickering like a sin, trying not to be remembered, came the final designation. 11th Protocol. The voice of Captain Vineyard descended upon Hades' hive through every surviving Vox tower, every cracked shrine speaker, every command relay, every hab block address grill, still blessed with power and damned with reception. It was not a sermon of comfort. It was not a promise. It was accusation, rendered in the flat iron growl of an Adeptus Astartes helmvox, cold enough to still the weeping of men who had already lost everything, and cruel enough to make them wish the line had gone dead. "You call yourselves innocent," said Vineyard. "You name yourselves faithful, because you have not raised a blade against the throne. You name yourselves loyal, because you have prayed while others bled. You name yourselves the Emperor's people, because you were born beneath his aquila and taught to make the sign of obedience before you learned the use of your hands." Across Hades' hive, men looked up from trenches filled with ash and blood. Guardsmen crouched behind barricades made from hab doors, burned-out cargo haulers, shattered statuary, and the bodies of tanks that had died still facing the enemy. Militia levies with trembling fingers clutched laser guns older than their grandfathers. Priests paused in their last rites. Medici orderlies stopped soaring through ruined limbs. Refugees in their hundreds of thousands huddled beneath tarpaulin, corrugated iron, and the broken shadow of manufactoria walls. Vineyard spoke to all of them. "Innocence is a lie. The galaxy does not measure your purity. It measures your strength. Survival is not a gift. It is a debt. Every breath you take is owed to the Imperium, and the Imperium has come to collect." The Vox crackled. Somewhere in the hive, a relay died in sparks and smoke. Another took up the transmission a heartbeat later, distorting his voice into something almost demonic. "You will stand. You will obey. You will die where you are placed if death is demanded of you. Do not ask us for pity. Do not ask us for rescue. Do not ask us to love what the Emperor himself has only commanded us to spend." In the eastern artillery terraces below the broken spine of Hades' hive, the Marines Malevolent heard their captain's words without reaction. Second Company prepared for war beneath a rain of ash. It fell in thick grey sheets, coating armor, weapons, munitions pallets, tank hulls, servo skulls, and the hunched backs of chapter serfs dragging missile reloads from armored munition crawlers. The ash got into everything. It clung to the yellow plate of the Astartes and turned them corpse pale. It gathered in the grooves of their silver aquilas and made them look like relics dug from the foundations of a dead cathedral. It softened nothing. It only made them seem older, dirtier, more hateful. A dozen whirlwind launchers squatted in a semicircle upon the terrace, their missile pods elevated toward the smoke-shrouded horizon. They were ugly machines, wounded machines, faithful machines. Half of them bore armor plates that did not belong to them. One launcher had an engine cowling stamped with the half-scraped heraldry of an extinct guard armored regiment. Another had a targeting cogitator housed in a casing taken from a predator tank. One had been patched with a slab of blue ceramite, the paint burned away, but not entirely enough to hide what it had once been. Tech Marine Harkane moved among them like a red-armored executioner attending a row of condemned giants. His servo arms clicked and hissed over his shoulders, each ending in tools, blades, injector needles, and sacred clamps. A censer hung from one mechadendrite, spilling machine incense into the ash-laden air. He touched each launcher with a gauntlet blackened by oil, intoning rites in Binharic static and low Gothic threat. Awaken, engine soul. Bite true. Fail me, and I will cleanse your motive spirit from your housing and offer your shell to a lesser machine. He daubed sacred oil across a cracked targeting lens. You will know your prey. You will carry wrath. You will not shame your iron. A serf slipped while loading a missile into the feed rack. The warhead dropped a handspan and struck the loader's cradle with a metallic clang. Every space marine nearby turned his helm. The serf froze, his face going the color of old parchment beneath the ash. Harkane crossed the distance in 3 strides. One servo arm seized the man by the shoulder, hard enough to crack bone. "Do you court martyrdom?" the tech marine asked, "or are you merely incompetent?" "My lord, the ash made the casing slick. I beg forgiveness." "Beg the missile. It was the insulted party." The serf pressed his bloody forehead to the warhead casing and whispered an apology to its machine spirit. Harkane released him and turned away before the man finished speaking. Nearby, Sergeant Lorcar watched the munitions tally with growing disgust. He was broad even for an Astartes, his armor an assemblage of poverty and refusal. His helm was Mark VI, the beaked plate scored by lasburns, and an orc blade scar that had nearly split the faceplate in 2. His left vambrace was newer than the rest of him, repainted from green, though the firedrake scale worked into its trim had not been completely filed away. His right pauldron was cracked through the chapter badge and repaired with black bonding staples. A devotional strip hung from his bolter, but the parchment bore ammunition counts rather than scripture. 6 salvos, Lorca said. Harkane did not look at him. 8, if the 5th launcher ceases sulking. 6 salvos for an army. Then kill more with each. I asked for armor piercing and incendiary saturation. You asked for what we do not possess. Lorcar stepped closer. We passed 3 guard depots on the way to this terrace. We passed 3 guard depots already claimed by 3 guard commanders who still possessed the breath to protest. Lorcar made a low sound through his vox. It might have been a laugh, if laughter had any place in him. Then we should have waited. For what? For the orcs to correct that inconvenience. Harkane turned then, red lenses meeting red lenses. You would loot the dead before the battle is won. I would arm my brothers before pretending the dead still own anything. Lorcar tapped the magazine locked into his bolter. This weapon has endured 9 centuries of treachery, rust, starvation, and lies. It has killed traitors, xenos, cowards, and saints. I have 3 full magazines for it. 3. Across the lower terraces lie 10,000 guardsmen who will be corpses by nightfall. Their charge packs will not miss them. Their grenades will not mourn them. Dead allies are future armories. Fallen chapters are donors by imperial necessity. Harkane's servo arms flexed. You speak theft as doctrine. I speak survival as doctrine. Survival without reverence becomes degradation. Reverence without ammunition becomes a corpse with clean hands. The 2 warriors stood in silence, ash ticking against their armor. At the terrace edge, beneath the broken sky, the world moved green. The orcs came on a scale no mortal mind could hold without breaking it into smaller lies. Not a horde. Hordes had edges, not an army. Armies had discipline. This was a migrating continent of violence, a living stormfront of muscle, iron, smoke, and noise. The ash-waste horizon writhed beneath them. Millions of greenskins advanced beneath scrap banners and glyph poles, their crude engines belching black exhaust into the already poisoned air. Battle wagons with spiked rams ground over the wrecks of Lehman Russ tanks. Trucks bounded over shell craters, shedding orcs as they went, only for the fallen to rise laughing or be crushed beneath the wheels of those behind them. Gargants strode among the smoke like walking factories, vast idols of rust and madness, their bellies glowing with furnace heat. One had a cathedral bell chained to its shoulder and rang it with each step, not by design, but because the impact of its footfalls shook the clapper against the iron. Another wore the front half of a bane blade as a breastplate. Its cannon arms fired at nothing and everything, shells screaming into the hive walls, into the ash, into its own vanguard, into the sky. The sound came ahead of them, the chant, the roar, the endless, delighted, idiot hunger for battle. It struck Hades' hive like weather. It rattled broken window panes in habstacks. It sent dust raining from command bunker ceilings. It made tank crews cross themselves over and over until their fingers shook. It made wounded men sit up and ask whether the walls had fallen. The hab block foundations trembled into powder. In the command alcove overlooking the artillery terrace, Colonel Severin Holt of the Astra Militarum stared at the advance through magnocular lenses and knew no line of men could hold that tide. He had fought on Armageddon for 47 days without sleeping longer than an hour at a time. His uniform was scorched, his eyes were red, his left hand had been replaced with a field augmetic that clicked whenever he clenched it, which was often. He lowered the lenses and turned to Captain Vineyard. "We need the evacuation corridors held, the Western Pilgrim Road and the Manufactorum Underpass. If we keep them open for another 3 hours, we can move the remaining civilians into the hive interior." Vineyard stood over a slate table, not looking at the refugees on the picked feeds, except as moving heat signatures. "No." Holt blinked, as if the word had struck him. "My lord? No. There are more than 200,000 Imperial citizens in those corridors. Then the orcs will follow them densely." The colonel's face hardened by degrees. Fatigue fell away beneath outrage. "You cannot mean to abandon the corridors. I mean to use them. They are evacuation routes. They are channels. For people. For enemy movement." Holt stared at the Space Marine captain. Around them, mortal officers pretended not to listen and failed. The air smelled of hot dust, sweat, machine oil, and old blood. The Vox continued to spit reports of collapsing outer lines. "My lord," Holt said, each word forced through his teeth, "that is murder." Vineyard finally looked at him. "No, Colonel. Murder is waste. This is expenditure." Holt's augmetic hand clicked shut. "The Salamanders would never allow this. The Salamanders are not here. The Black Templars would call it dishonor. The Black Templars may spend their honor holding a gate until they are buried beneath it. They are the Emperor's subjects, and we are his weapons." Vineyard leaned over the slate. His gauntlet passed through the ghost-light icons of fleeing civilians and advancing orcs alike. The Western Pilgrim Road narrows between these hab cliffs. The Manufactorum Underpass creates an acoustic blind where their vehicles will bunch. The refugees will slow. The orcs will press. When the pressure is sufficient, the whirlwinds will speak. You are sacrificing them. I am giving their deaths consequence. Below them, among the whirlwinds, Lorcar received the firing solution and gave a short nod. His squad took positions around the launchers, not to defend them from the orcs yet, but from any mortal foolish enough to interfere. The refugees reached the Western Pilgrim Road under a sky the color of a bruise. They came in waves, pressed shoulder to shoulder between walls of broken habstacks. Their clothes were grey with ash. Their faces were hollow. Many carried nothing. Some dragged ration tins, devotional icons, water cans, tools, bundles of rags that had once mattered. Guardsmen urged them forward with hoarse voices and empty threats. Priests shouted prayers from atop wrecked transports until the crowd swallowed the sound. Behind them, the orc guns began to find the road. The first shells landed short, turning the rear of the column into a churn of smoke and torn meat. The crowd surged. Men fell and vanished under boots. A chimera tried to reverse through them and became trapped in living pressure, its tracks grinding bodies into red pulp until its driver was dragged out through the hatch by screaming hands. Then the orcs hit the rear barricade. It had been made from cargo containers, razor wire, burned tanks, and the last stubbornness of the guard. It lasted 9 minutes. The greenskins came over it in a flood. They hacked through the defenders with glee, choppers rising and falling, black iron teeth opening men from shoulder to hip. Lasfire cut into them. Heavy bolters stitched red holes through their torsos. Grenades burst beneath their feet. They kept coming, laughing, roaring, slipping in blood, and finding that funny too. One orc lifted a guardsman above its head and tore him in half, showering those beneath with viscera before a crack missile took the beast in the chest and blew its spine out through its back. The line folded. The refugee column became a trap with a heartbeat. Orcs plunged into the fleeing mass. Blades flashed, stubbers roared, bodies burst and spun. The air filled with screams, gunfire, hymns, engines, and the wet sound of close killing. Guardsmen tried to form firing ranks in the crush and were knocked down by those they were trying to save. A commissar shot 3 men for retreating before an orc round removed his jaw and half his throat. He remained standing long enough to fire one last bolt into the mob before vanishing beneath green hands. On the terrace, the Marine's Malevolent waited. Lorcar watched through his helm display as the heat signatures merged. Human, orc, human, orc. Panic made the refugees surge deeper into the road. Bloodlust made the orcs pursue faster. The picked feed became a tangle of bodies and weapon flashes. Density rising, Arcane said. Not enough, Vineyard voxed. Another barricade collapsed. The Manufactorum underpass filled with refugees, then orcs, then vehicles trying to force passage through both. A battle wagon rammed into the tunnel mouth and became wedged there, its engine roaring, its crew firing wildly into the mass ahead of them. The pressure behind it grew. More orcs climbed over the vehicle. More humans were crushed against its ram and wheels. The tunnel became a slaughterhouse without walls enough to hold the blood. Holt was shouting now. "Fire, damn you! Fire now!" Vineyard did not turn. Not yet. They are dying. Yes. They are dying. Yes. On the Pict, a squad of guardsmen managed to rally around a shrine marker. They formed a ring with bayonets fixed, firing until their charge packs died, stabbing until their rifles snapped, then fighting with knives, entrenching tools, fists, teeth. The orcs rolled over them in laughing waves. The shrine marker toppled. Its aquila vanished beneath boots. Holt grabbed for Vinya's arm. Tuarok stopped him. The sergeant's gauntlet closed around the colonel's augmetic wrist and crushed it until metal screamed. Holt gasped and dropped to one knee, face whitening with agony. "Do not touch the captain," Tuarok said. Holt looked up at him with hatred bright enough to shame fire. "You monsters!" Turok's red lenses regarded him without interest. "Useful monsters." Vinya watched the slate. The icons tightened. The enemy mass thickened inside the projected kill zone. Orc vehicles jammed the road. Infantry pressed around them. The refugees had nowhere left to run except forward, and forward only dragged the greenskins deeper. Harkane's voice came over the command channel. "All launchers hungry. 5th launcher compliant under threat of dismantlement. Awaiting your word." Vinya raised one hand. Across the terrace, whirlwind pods adjusted with grinding obedience. Targeting cogitators clicked. Missile spirits woke in their cradles, kissed by ignition flame and hatred. Chapter serfs threw themselves flat or pressed their faces to the deck in prayer. Holt struggled against Tuarok's grip. You will answer for this." Vineyard looked at the colonel then, and there was no triumph in him, no doubt, no pleasure, only certainty. "So will they," he said, looking back to the refugees and the orcs locked together below. "Before the throne." His hand fell. The whirlwinds fired. The terrace vanished beneath smoke and flame. Missiles screamed into the poisoned sky in rippling salvos, climbing above Hades' hive before curving down toward the Western Pilgrim Road and the Manufactorum underpass. Their contrails cut white wounds through the ash clouds. The sound arrived as a continuous shriek, a choir of descending judgment. In later years, when Inquisitor Halvek Mordain would replay the archived Picts alone in sealed chambers and listen to the dead scream through static, he would remember that moment with a clarity that no prayer, no amasec, no sanctioned mnemonic purge could remove. He would remember the refugees looking upward. He would remember the orcs roaring louder, welcoming the incoming fire as if it were another enemy to fight. He would remember Captain Vineyard standing motionless while the rockets fell. That was not when I began to hate them. That was when I began to understand them. The first whirlwind missile struck the Western Pilgrim Road, where the refugee column had become too dense to move. Judgment fell as fire. The warhead punched into the packed mass and detonated with a bloom of white heat. Bodies vanished at the center of the blast, not thrown, not broken, simply unmade into steam, ash, and red vapor. Those farther out burst apart in layers. Skin split, armor cracked, bone became shrapnel. Men who had been screaming a heartbeat before were reduced to wet marks on ferrocrete and shredded cloth tumbling through the smoke. Orcs died with them, massive green bodies opening beneath the pressure wave, rib cages splitting outward, skulls pulping inside iron jaw plates, limbs torn loose and flung spinning across the road. The second missile struck the battle wagon wedged in the Manufactorum underpass. Its fuel tanks ignited. The underpass became a furnace. Orcs packed around the vehicle burned alive, their bodies thrashing in the confined dark, their laughter turning to bellows as flame cooked the breath from their lungs. Refugees crushed against the wreckage ignited with them. The pressure wave rolled through the tunnel and came out both ends carrying fire, bone chips, scraps of flak armor, and a rain of blackened hands. Then the rest of the salvo arrived. The sky screamed. Missiles came down in disciplined patterns, not wild wrath, not blind destruction, but calculated murder performed with the cold patience of an artillery rite. They walked across the road in neat increments. They bracketed the fleeing masses, cut apart the orc pursuit, collapsed the hab walls that hemmed the enemy in, then struck the densest clusters, where human heat signatures and greenskin bulk had become impossible to separate. Every detonation made the world smaller. Sound lost meaning. There was only impact and aftermath. Impact and aftermath. A hammerfall rhythm that crushed thought flat. The Pilgrim Road disappeared beneath smoke and flying debris. The Manufactorum underpass vomited flame. Medici tents became brief silhouettes against the fire before they were erased. Icons of the Emperor, nailed to posts and tank wrecks by desperate hands, spun through the air with strips of skin and torn banners clinging to them. A brass aquila, blackened and bent, landed in a crater filled with burning promethium and floated there like a drowning relic. Orcs staggered from the smoke with bodies full of shrapnel, laughing blood through broken tusks until the next warhead cut them into meat. Some tried to charge the falling fire because they were orcs and stupidity had been made sacred in their blood. They came roaring through the blast haze, aflame, half-blind, firing crude weapons into the sky. Whirlwind fragments scythed them down in mobs. The lucky ones died whole enough to hit the ground in one piece. The unlucky joined the road. By the time the third salvo fell, the Western Pilgrim Road was no longer a road. It was a trough of churned flesh, crushed armor, burning oil, pulverized masonry, and liquefied mud made red by thousands of opened bodies. Captain Vineyard walked into it while the shells were still falling. His armor rang beneath the impacts of shrapnel. Splinters of metal sparked from his pauldron. A piece of orc blade, hurled by a blast from somewhere unseen, struck his helm and skidded away with a shriek of tortured ceramite. He did not slow. His red lenses swept across the ruin, reading heat, movement, mass, threat. Target runes ghosted over his vision. The dead glowed briefly, then cooled. The dying flickered. The orcs burned hot, huge and stubborn, their bodies refusing to stop even when mangled past reason. Vineyard marked them with a thought. "Pocket at shrine ruin," he voxed. 26 greenskins, 1 heavy weapon, 2 Nob-class signatures, mortar team buried beneath the southern wall. Kill them. No rage entered his voice, no triumph, no disgust. He spoke as a man might recite inventory. Around him, shells continued to fall beyond the immediate advance line. The barrage had shifted deeper, caging the surviving greenskins and preventing withdrawal. Vineyard moved through the devastation between impacts, each stride sinking to the ankle, in body mud. Once, his boot came down on a human skull, softened by blast pressure. It collapsed beneath him with a wet crack. He did not look down. Sergeant Turok led his squad in a spread formation behind him. The Marines Malevolent advanced with bolters locked to their shoulders, old weapons barking in controlled bursts. Their armor was made monstrous by the gore. Yellow plate had become brown, black, red. Ash clung to blood and turned it into paste. Turok's corvus helm was streaked from beak to gorget with the residue of the bombardment. Strips of flesh hung from the bonding studs of his greave. He ignored them. His auto-sensors painted the world in heat and threat priority. Orc, kill, human, dying, obstructing line, kill if required, human, mobile, unarmed, ignore unless obstruction, orc, wounded, kill, orc, dead, confirm. The squad reached a crater where a mob of greenskins had survived beneath the overturned shell of a Chimera transport. They were trapped, but not helpless. One had lost both legs and was dragging itself forward with its arms, laughing as it tried to bite through a severed human hand still clenched around a las pistol. Another lifted a shooter, made from 3 different weapons wired together, and sprayed rounds into the smoke. Turok's bolter spoke twice. The first orc's head burst, spraying teeth across the crater wall. The second took a mass-reactive shell in the shoulder that detonated inside its torso and blew one arm, half its chest, and most of its spine into the mud. A wounded guardsman crawled from beneath the same chimera. His armor melted into the meat of his back. He raised one hand toward Turok. His face was black with soot, except where tears had cut pale lines through the grime. "My lord," he gasped, "I am loyal. I am loyal." Turok stepped over him to fire at movement beyond the crater. The guardsman clutched his ankle plate. "My lord, please." The sergeant looked down. The man's hand blocked his stride. It was a small thing, a nothing thing, a human thing. Turok kicked once. Ceramite met bone. The guardsman's skull snapped sideways, neck breaking with a sound lost beneath bolter fire. His hand released. "Advance," Turok ordered. The squad advanced. Another Marine, Brother Kale, swept his auspex over a mound of bodies and detected heartbeats beneath it. He tore away corpses until he found 3 orcs buried under human dead, stunned but breathing. He executed them one by one. Beneath the last orc was a Munitorum clerk with no legs, still alive, his lips moving around a prayer that had no sound left in it. Kyle considered him for the span of a single breath, then fired once when the clerk's twitching body interfered with the auspex reading. No one rebuked him. No one praised him. The work continued. For 6 hours, the Marines Malevolent killed. They killed efficiently. That was the obscenity Halvek Mordain could not dismiss, though he tried to clothe his revulsion in law, doctrine, and the cold grammar of inquiry. They did not slaughter because they had lost control. They did not butcher because rage had blinded them. There was no frenzy in them, no indulgence, no screaming devotion to blood. They killed because killing was the correct tool, and they had stripped every other tool of value. The guard had failed for 6 days to halt the Orc push through the western approaches. Regiments had been fed into the roads and underpasses until the roads drank them dry. Artillery had scattered the enemy, but never broken them. Countercharges had ended in heaps of dead men and laughing greenskins. Armored thrusts had bogged down in ash drifts and wreckage, then been boarded by Orcs with chain blades and demolition charges. Every hour, the greenskin mass had grown closer to the hive interior. The Marines Malevolent broke that mass before dusk. They used the refugee flow as bait, the underpass as a trap, the pilgrim road as a killing trough, and the whirlwinds as the blade. Once the bombardment did its work, Second Company entered the ruin and cut apart every surviving knot of Orc resistance with the patience of morticians. Turok's squad purged the tunnel. Lorcar's combat squads swept the Hab cliffs and shot anything green that still twitched. Harkane's servitors dragged ammunition from the dead, stripping crack grenades from guardsmen, promethium canisters from wrecked chimeras, and heavy bolter belts from shattered emplacements. Chapter serfs moved behind them with hooks and cutters, taking what the living would need from those who no longer had claims. By the 6th hour, a major Orc warband lay annihilated. The cost was written everywhere. Thousands of Imperial dead filled the kill zone. Some were scattered across the road in pieces too small for recovery. Some remained fused to the underside of tank wrecks. Some hung from razor wire in black strips. Some still clutched icons. Some still wore medici bands. Some had died with their mouths open, and ash had filled them until they looked as though they had been silenced by the world itself. Vineyard stood at the center of Emperor's deliverance and reviewed the aftermath. The camp's name had survived on a single broken board, half buried in mud. The letters were scorched. A dead Orc lay across the word Emperor, its blood steaming in the cooling air. Nearby, a medici tent had collapsed into a crater. Its white canvas was black. The cots inside had become twisted metal and char. Surgical tools glittered among fragments of bone. A severed arm, still bearing a patient tag, protruded from the mud beside an Orc boot. Halvek arrived under escort as the last shots faded. He walked with his stormtroopers through the remains of the camp and found that his mind began sorting horror against his will. It catalogued, it measured, it observed blast patterns and ammunition discipline. It noted how thoroughly the Orcs had been concentrated before the strike. It noted the absence of unnecessary shells after the target was broken. It noted the tactical success. That made him angrier than outrage would have. Because Vineyard had been right, not morally, not spiritually, not in any way a priest would dare utter from a pulpit, but tactically. The Orc warband was dead. The western approach was sealed. Hades' hive had been spared a breach. All it had cost was a camp full of the Emperor's people. The Salamanders arrived too late. Their relief spearhead came through the ash on armored carriers, painted green and black, their hulls bearing flame markings dulled by dust. Land raiders ground over the broken road with flamers held silent. Rhinos followed with their hatches scarred by recent battle. Salamanders moved among the wreckage in disciplined fury, their dark armor marked by flame and drake, their eye lenses burning with restrained wrath. They did not speak at first. They looked. They saw the blackened refugee icons. They saw the cratered medici tents. They saw Orc corpses piled with Imperial dead, indistinguishable in places except by size, tusk, and uniform scrap. They saw Marines Malevolent serfs stripping munitions from fallen guardsmen while the bodies were still warm. Then the Salamanders parted. Chapter Master Tushan walked through them. He was a giant among giants, his presence heavy with command, his armor dark as volcanic stone and edged in flame. His face was bare, his skin was obsidian, his eyes red with the ember glow of nocturne suns. He carried his rage as a forge carries heat, contained, purposeful, terrible, because it had not yet been released. Vineyard turned to face him. The two chapter lords stood amid the dead of Emperor's deliverance, ash falling between them like the dust of burned prayers. "Captain Vineyard," Tushan said. "Chapter Master," Vineyard replied. The title was correct. The tone was not reverent. Tushan's gaze moved once across the field of corpses, then returned to the yellow-armored captain. "These were the Emperor's people." Vineyard said nothing. "You were sent to defend them. I defended the hive. You murdered those who trusted in the angels of death." Vineyard's helm lenses glowed in the smoke. They trusted poorly. One of the salamanders behind Tushan shifted, flame weapon lowering a fraction. In answer, Tuarok and two others adjusted their bolters by the same measure. Not enough to aim. Enough to make aiming inevitable. Tushan saw it. So did Vineyard. So did every mortal in the camp. Halvek felt the change in the air. It was the instant before a void shield failed. The instant before a condemned man realized the shot had already been fired and sound had not yet reached him. Tushan took one step closer. His voice dropped. "This is a betrayal of the Emperor's people." Vineyard answered at once. "The Emperor protects those with the strength to remain useful." The words landed harder than any shell. Tushan's hands closed. The leather of his gauntlets creaked. Behind him, salamanders stood in silence that was more dangerous than shouting. Their wrath was not theatrical. It was not mortal anger. It was the anger of warriors who had crossed burning worlds to save strangers and found their supposed kin using those strangers as bait. Vineyard's warriors did not bristle. They did not posture. They simply prepared. A bolt gun muzzle lowered by a handspan. A flamer pilot flame hissed alive. A chainsword's teeth clicked once as its engine accepted ignition. A mortal officer nearby began whispering a prayer and forgot the words halfway through. Halvek understood then that every human present was an insect between demigods, not men, not soldiers in some shared fraternity of arms. Demigods, engineered murderers wearing the bones of industry and the heraldry of faith, each capable of tearing a mortal platoon apart with his hands, each restrained from killing the other only by doctrine, pride, and the thin black thread of imperial necessity. If the Salamanders and Marines Malevolent opened fire, the humans would die first. Not because anyone aimed for them, because storms did not aim at leaves. Tushan leaned close enough that the ash between him and Vineyard seemed to vanish. "You shame the blood of the Adeptus Astartes." Vineyard did not move. "No, Chapter Master, I reveal it." For a moment, Halvek believed Tushan would strike him. Perhaps Vineyard believed it too. Perhaps he wanted it. But the salamander did not. His rage remained chained, not by weakness, but by a strength the Marines Malevolent mistook for sentiment. He looked once more at the field of dead, and something in his expression hardened beyond fury into judgment. This will be remembered. Vineyard inclined his helm by the smallest degree. Then remember the victory accurately. Tushan turned away first. The salamanders began recovery rites for the dead, who had no one else left to name them. They lifted bodies from mud. They separated human remains from orc carcasses, where separation was still possible. They found icons and placed them with the corpses. They spoke prayers over strangers. Some of the Marines Malevolent watched them as if observing a wasteful alien custom. Halvek recorded everything. He recorded the bombardment. He recorded the tactical result. He recorded the confrontation. He recorded the fact that the Salamanders hated the Marines Malevolent, not because they were ineffective, but because they were effective without honor. The distinction mattered. It was the center of the wound. A failed chapter could be censured. A corrupt chapter could be purged. But a loyal chapter that won wars by making cruelty indistinguishable from efficiency was a harder thing to condemn, because the Imperium itself had long ago learned the same language and merely preferred softer pronunciation. At the edge of the camp, Apothecary Sorn knelt beside a dead brother of the Marines Malevolent. The fallen warrior had been killed by a lucky orc shell that struck during the final sweep. His chest plate was open, not by enemy action, but by Sorn's narthecium. The apothecary worked in silence, white armor stained red to the elbows. His helm lenses reflected the exposed ruin of the dead Space Marine's torso. Reinforced ribs had been spread. The secondary heart lay still. The black carapace had been cut with reverent precision. Sorn extracted the progenoid gland, as if removing a relic from a desecrated shrine. He placed it into a stasis vial. The vial filled with pale suspension fluid. Runes crawled across its surface as the machine spirit tasted the gene seed and confirmed viability. Then one rune flickered amber. Sorn stilled. He turned the vial in his gauntlet, bringing it closer to his helm optics. His narthecium whispered as augers narrowed their focus. A microscopic irregularity appeared in the gland's surface tissue. Not corruption, not mutation, not degradation. A marker, too precise to be accident, too old to be battlefield damage, too small for unassisted sight, yet unmistakable beneath the apothecary's instruments. Sorn accessed the chapter's sealed comparative banks. Ultramarines, no match. Imperial Fists, no match. White Scars, no match. Raven Guard, no match. Salamanders, no match. Iron Hands, no match. Blood Angels, no match. Dark Angels, no match. Space. Wolves, no match. The sanctioned Primarch lines rejected the mark one by one. Sorn remained kneeling among the corpses of Emperor's deliverance, the stasis vial glowing in his hand like a confession. Behind him, the Salamanders prayed over the dead. Ahead of him, Vineyard stood amid the ash and watched Hades' hive burn. The apothecary closed his fist around the vial and encrypted the reading before the machine spirit could transmit it to the wider apothecarian. For the first time that day, beneath all the reek of blood, smoke and victory, Sorn tasted fear. Halvek Mordain learned that the present was never truly present inside the Imperium. It was only the newest layer of dust. Beneath every order lay an older order. Beneath every oath, a contradiction. Beneath every honor roll, a casualty ledger with the names burned off. The Imperium did not remember as men remembered. It hoarded, it sealed, it misfiled truth in vaults of sanctified ignorance and let whole wars become footnotes if the correct hand signed the correct death warrant. The Macarian files had not wanted to open. Gethro worked for 9 hours without prayer, food, or complaint. The autosavant's broken hand had swollen beneath its bandages. His left eye twitched with every surge of noospheric resistance from the slate bank. 3 times the cogitator rejected Halvek's rosette. Twice it displayed execution ciphers older than the inquisitorial seal, now being used to violate them. Once it began reciting a litany of denial in a dead administratum dialect until Gethro drove a data spike through the speaker grill and silenced it with a wet snap of sparks. At last, the archive yielded. The chamber aboard Purgatory dimmed. The air chilled. An old Pict record unfolded in broken green light, and Armageddon's ash was replaced by another war, another age, another wound the Imperium had survived by refusing to understand it. The Macarian crusade lived again, not in glory. Glory was for triumphal frescoes and devotional hollow statues, for stone Macarius with his sword raised toward the stars, while cherubs circled his head, and scribes pretended conquest had been clean. The archive showed the truth in fragments, void ships crowding the dark between worlds, grand crusade banners hanging from cathedral prows, regiments beyond easy counting ferried from one compliance zone to the next, titans striding across burning continents, navy wings vanishing into flak clouds, astropathic choirs screaming themselves blind to keep pace with the appetite of expansion. Lord Solar Macarius existed in the record as distance, a name in gold, a face on banners, a voice rebroadcast through 1 million voxcasters until it became less a man than weather. the Marines Malevolent, existed in the record as impact. They came at chapter strength then, before starvation had gnawed them into the scavenger thing Halvek had walked among. Their armor was brighter in the old Picts, though never clean. Their yellow plate carried battle damage, but not the desperate patchwork of the present age. Their bolters were better maintained. Their whirlwinds had full racks. Their battle barges bore uniform plating and functioning lance arrays. Their serfs wore proper livery. Their ammunition rights were performed with abundance rather than hunger. They had not yet been broken. They had only been cruel. The archive showed a world named Caradon Tertius, though Halvek suspected the name had been changed after censure. Its capital hive had refused compliance for 19 months under a planetary noble who declared loyalty to the Emperor while denying the Crusade its tithe, its shipyards, and its sons. Imperial Guard formations encircled the hive and died in layers against its walls. Negotiators vanished. Priests were crucified from gun towers. Water lines were poisoned. The defenders held beneath banners bearing the Aquila, as if symbols could excuse disobedience. The Marines Malevolent solved the siege in 8 days. They did not storm the hive first. That would have wasted transhuman blood. They did not negotiate. That would have wasted breath. They identified the food reserves, the water reclamation engines, the Medici vaults, and the Hab districts least defended because they housed children, laborers, and the infirm. Then they shelled them. Not randomly, not in rage. They broke the hive's capacity to endure. On the 3rd day, the starving began rioting against their own defenders. On the 5th, the nobles' militia opened the inner gates to seize corpse starch from the lower Habs. On the 6th, the Marines Malevolent broadcast surrender terms, while orbital guns targeted the evacuation shelters. On the 8th, they entered through gates opened from within by men too hungry to stand upright. The Pict showed yellow-armored warriors walking through avenues of kneeling civilians. None raised weapons, none spoke blessings. A chapter sergeant stopped beside a father, holding a dead infant wrapped in a ration cloth. The man reached out, not to attack, not even to beg, perhaps only to touch the angel who had ended the siege. The sergeant stepped over him. Behind the Marines, Malevolent came compliance officers, execution cadres, tithe auditors, corpse collectors, and preachers with prepared sermons about the mercy of imperial unity. The world was counted loyal by the end of the week. The Allies hated them for it. Halvek saw it in the lesser records, complaints from guard generals, condemnations from ministorum confessors who had still signed the victory rolls, censure recommendations from crusade staff who then requested Marine Malevolent redeployment to the next impossible front. The chapter's actions were described as excessive, strategically effective, spiritually corrosive, logistically admirable, politically dangerous. Every accusation ended with the same unspoken confession. They worked. The Star Phantoms appeared beside them in later files, pale-armored and silent, their presence a cold mirror to the Yellow Butchers. They fought without flourish, without sermon, without the crude contempt that clung to the Marines, Malevolent, like old blood. Where the Malevolent broke populations, the Star Phantoms broke fortresses. Where Vineyard's forebears starved cities into surrender, the Star Phantoms reduced shield generators and macro bastions with disciplined fire. They were not gentle. No Adeptus Astartes was gentle, but their silence carried a different weight. Not disdain, distance. Together, they ground worlds into obedience. One archive shard showed them advancing through the smoke of a planetary capital after a coordinated drop. The Star Phantoms moved along the high causeways, missile launchers and plasma weapons firing in measured sequence. The Marines Malevolent advanced below, driving civilian mobs ahead of them into barricaded streets to draw fire from rebels hidden in manufacturing windows. When the rebels fired, the Yellow Warriors marked the positions and annihilated the structures floor by floor. When the civilians broke and tried to run, the Marines Malevolent herded them back into the killing lanes, with bolter fire aimed low enough to cripple and high enough to terrify. A Star Phantom captain watched from a shattered transit bridge. His Vox capture survived. "You spend them freely," he said. The malevolent officer below turned his helm upward. His name had been degraded by archive rot. Only the rank remained. "They were born spent," he replied. "We merely assign value." The Star Phantom said nothing more. Silence, Halvek thought, was sometimes the shape disgust took when duty forbade speech. Then Macarius died. The archive did not show the death. It showed the consequence. The crusade, that vast engine of conquest driven by one impossible will, began to eat itself. Orders contradicted one another across light years. Admirals swore rival oaths. Generals raised banners in the name of succession, purity, revenge, necessity, ambition. Worlds conquered in the Emperor's name were asked to choose between his servants and discovered that every answer was treason to someone. Supply lines became battlefronts. Munitorum depots became fortresses. Crusade brothers became executioners. The Macarian heresy ignited like Prometheum poured across the stars. Former allies slaughtered one another across entire systems. The archive became faster then, more corrupted, more reluctant. Halvek watched Void War unfold in strobing fragments. Battle barges turned their guns upon ships they had once shielded. Strike cruisers traded torpedoes at knife range. Boarding claws punched into sacred hulls. Astartes fought Astartes in cathedral corridors, while mortal crews died by the thousands from decompression, fire, and shrapnel without ever knowing which loyalty had killed them. The Star Phantoms and the Marines Malevolent met in that madness. No single record explained the cause. Perhaps orders had conflicted. Perhaps one chapter had accused the other of false allegiance. Perhaps old contempt had finally found permission to become war. Perhaps the truth had been sealed because it was less important than the shame of it. The clash was void and ground, blade and lance, orbit and mud. The Marines' Malevolent battle barge, Hammer of Contempt, died first, its shields overloaded by concentrated lance fire from Star Phantom vessels. The Pict showed its spine breaking under white fire, cathedral towers shearing away into the void, launch bays vomiting flame as thunderhawks and serfs and ammunition stores were torn into vacuum. Escape pods blossomed from its flanks. Many were shot down. Some were ignored. The Star Phantoms did not waste fire on what trajectory and cold would kill. Purgation's light answered with torpedoes that gutted a Star Phantom strike cruiser from prow to engine sanctum. Its reactor did not explode. It bled. Thousands of crewmen vented into space among fragments of chapel glass, armor plate, frozen blood, and pages from prayer books that spun open and closed as if trying to speak. Then came the boarding. Astartes killed Astartes in corridors too narrow for honor. Bolters roared at ranges where muzzle flashes painted helms white. Chainswords chewed through ceramite and the meat beneath. Power fists cracked breastplates open and pulped secondary hearts. Marines fought on after losing arms. They fought while burning. They fought with knives when ammunition ran dry. They fought in silence or curses depending on the chapter, and the dead of both were trampled by brothers who could not stop to recover them. The Marines Malevolent lost their gene vault on Kulth. Halvek watched that record 3 times. The vault had been buried beneath a fortress monastery annex, built into the side of a dead volcano. Star Phantom siege guns opened it from orbit after void shields failed. The first strike cracked the mountain. The second vaporized the outer sanctum. The third reached the vault. Stasis reliquaries burst. Gene seed canisters shattered. Apothecaries died trying to carry what they could through fire and falling stone. The Pict feed from one apothecary's helm showed rows of progenoid caskets tumbling from split racks and spilling pale fluid across black marble. A dreadnought sarcophagus fell from its cradle, its front armor cracked open by debris. The ancient within woke to fire, screamed through a vox speaker older than many worlds, and died as molten rock poured over his exposed remains. The Marines Malevolent did not have time for recovery rites. That was what Halvek saw repeated across the records. Brothers died unrecovered in void corridors. Dreadnoughts were abandoned in burning holds. Progenoids were lost in firestorms, eaten by decompression, crushed beneath collapsing fortresses. Names went unspoken because Vox channels were jammed with targeting data and death screams. Chaplains died with litanies half complete. Apothecaries were killed reaching for the fallen. The chapter's future bled out alongside its present. It reduced them, not merely in number, in faith, in expectation, in the quiet assumptions by which even cruel warriors believed their dead would be honored, their war gear preserved, their seed returned to the chapter's keeping. The Macarian scar was not a campaign wound. It was an amputation performed with enemy fire and imperial indifference. In one of the final ground records, a younger Captain Castor lay beneath a mountain of corpses. He was not yet the hard relic Halvek would later know by reputation, not yet the commander of killers, whose name carried its own distaste in Ordo briefings. He was a sergeant then, pinned beneath dead brothers and dead star phantoms in the lower decks of a wrecked orbital bastion that had fallen burning into the sea of a nameless moon. His armor was cracked, his helm was gone, one eye was swollen shut beneath a mask of blood. His left arm hung uselessly, the bones broken inside the plate. Around him, the battle had moved on. Not ended, moved on. There was a difference only soldiers understood. A star phantom crawled nearby, wounded through the abdomen, one leg missing below the knee. His white armor was blackened by fire. His bolter lay within reach, but he lacked the strength to lift it. Castor watched him through blood and smoke. The star phantom watched back. For a while, neither spoke. Then the star phantom reached for a magazine at his belt. Castor moved first. He dragged himself from beneath the dead by tearing his own armor seals against broken ceramite. He left skin behind. He left blood behind. He reached the star phantom as the pale warrior tried to slot the magazine into his bolter. Castor drove a combat knife into the wound in the star phantom's gut. The other Astartes convulsed. Castor twisted the blade until the warrior's breath left him in a wet growl. Then he took the magazine from the dead hand, checked the ammunition count, and laughed once through broken teeth. Not because it was funny, because he was alive, and the dead were not. He killed 2 more wounded star phantoms in that compartment, one with the knife, one with a stolen bolt pistol, the last with his hands when the pistol clicked empty. Then he stripped them of ammunition, grenades, and a functioning helm. He took a pauldron from one and wore it unpainted for 3 weeks because his own had been shattered. He used a dead enemy's war gear to rejoin his surviving brothers. The archive lingered on his face as he stood among the wreckage, young and blood-slick, and already old in the only way that mattered. Halvek understood then why the chapter scavenged, not as habit alone, not as insult alone, as memory. The war ended, as imperial wars so often ended, in paperwork laid over mass graves. The Marines Malevolent were cleared of heresy. That phrase appeared in the records with the weight of a closing tomb. Cleared of heresy, not honored, not restored, not absolved in any way that fed armories or rebuilt gene vaults or returned the names of the unrecovered dead. They were censured for excesses, reprimanded for operational conduct, restricted in claims upon certain Forge World supply chains, and politically isolated by commanders who had used them when useful and condemned them once their usefulness became inconvenient. They survived. Barely. Their battle barges were gutted. Their armories were hollowed. Their gene stores were diminished to dangerous margins. Their dead outnumbered their recoverable future. Allies distrusted them. Administratum clerks delayed resupply. Forge masters found reasons to honor other petitions first. Crusade records praised sacrifice in general terms, while naming other chapters in gold. The Marines Malevolent learned the lesson with absolute clarity. Brotherhood had not saved them. Honor had not saved them. The gratitude of the Imperium had not saved them. The bonds of shared war had burned away the moment necessity changed shape. Hatred saved them. Theft saved them. Refusal saved them. The refusal to die when unsupported. The refusal to ask permission from men who would spend them and then judge the stains. The refusal to leave a usable magazine on a dead man's belt because the dead had rank, heraldry, or prior claim. The refusal to mistake contempt for weakness. The refusal to honor an ally's corpse more than a brother's hunger for ammunition. Halvek watched the archive fade and saw the present Marines Malevolent more clearly than he wished. Their cracked armor seals, their antique bolters, their scavenged plating, their indifference to the corpses of allies, their hatred sharpened into doctrine. Their cruelty did not begin at Emperor's deliverance. It had merely found another battlefield on which to speak an old language. Gethro coughed blood into a cloth and bent over the slate again. "My lord," the auto-savant whispered. Halvek did not look away from the dying projection. "What is it?" "There is an addendum." "Open it." "I cannot. It bears Ordo Astartes authority, higher seal than the censure judgment. It was not meant to sit with the Macarian files." "Open it." "My lord, the counterseal will burn the slate." "Then read quickly." Gethro inserted a thin brass key into the cogitator's reliquary port. The machine spirit shrieked. Every lumen in the chamber dimmed to red. A line of high Gothic text appeared, trembling beneath layers of deliberate corruption. The auto-savant began to read, then stopped. Halvek crossed the chamber and seized him by the collar. "Read." Gethro's voice shook. Subject chapter displays pre-heresy 11th aggression markers. The slate caught fire. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then the words disappeared into smoke, and somewhere deep inside Purgatory, the guns of the Marines Malevolent began to fire again. Archimedes Rex drifted cold and dead beyond the war lanes of Armageddon. A forged ship of the Adeptus Mechanicus opened to the void like a butchered leviathan. It had once been vast enough to humble smaller warships by proximity alone. Its spine was a ribbed mountain of iron cathedrals, furnace stacks, manufactorum vaults, dock arms, and engine sanctums that had crossed the stars with the solemn arrogance of Mars. Red towers rose from its back in ranks, each crowned by antennae, prayer veins, and cog-toothed shrines. Vast cranes hung frozen along its flanks, their claws still spread to cradle war engines that would never be birthed. The prow had been cast in the image of a hooded skull with a cog halo, though half the face had been torn away by whatever violence had killed the vessel. The wound ran from portside armor belt to midship reactor cloister. It was not a clean breach. It was a ragged canyon of peeled plating, split decks, exposed machine organs, and crystallized coolant venting in glittering clouds. Whole compartments lay open to space. Chapel vaults, crew decks, armories, and assembly shrines were visible through the rent, stacked upon one another in deathly cross-section. Frozen bodies drifted near the wound in slow procession. Priests of Mars, menials, gun crews, servitors, and scitari, all turning gently in the silence as if still awaiting orders. No distress beacon sang. No engine pulse answered the augurs. No machine spirit challenged the intruders. That silence was what drew the Marines Malevolent. The boarding torpedo struck the outer hull with a sound felt rather than heard, its melter charge chewing a red wound through the frozen plating. Internal clamps bit. The assault iris opened. Yellow-armored warriors entered the corpse of Archimedes Rex, with bolters raised, and no prayers for the dead. Sergeant Lorcar went first. His boots struck the deck in a corridor glazed white with frost. The impact sent brittle flakes of frozen blood spinning from the floor. His helm lenses adjusted through darkness, then smoke haze, then emergency red, then the blue-white pallor of void cold. The corridor ahead was narrow and tall, built for robed tech priests and their attendant machines rather than Astartes, but the Marines' Malevolent forced themselves through without slowing. Ceramite shoulders scraped sacred brasswork. Bolter barrels knocked aside devotional chains. A hanging cogitator sensor snapped beneath Lorca's pauldron and drifted away, spilling frozen incense beads like black hail. Dead Skitari hung in zero gravity, where the corridor's grav plates had failed. They were still beautiful, in the manner of weaponized devotion. Red robes stiff with ice, brass masks rimed white, radium carbines clenched in metal fingers. Their armor had been punctured, torn, or cooked from within. Blood had crystallized around their wounds into black beads that hovered near them in loose halos. Some had died firing, some had died sealing bulkheads, some had died with no visible wound at all, their flesh inside the augmetic shells liquefied by pressure change and cold. Brother Morcant pushed one aside with the muzzle of his bolter. The corpse spun slowly, robes unfolding like the petals of a dead flower. "Contact," Lorca voxed. "None," came Brother Kale. "Life signs. Machine ghosts, cooling reactors, no organic signatures beyond the dead." "Continue." They advanced through the vessel in a wedge, moving by helm lumen and Auspex return. Their armor was already scarred from Armageddon, the sunburst yellow dulled by ash that vacuum had not entirely stripped away. The ship's dead reflected them in fractured surfaces, yellow giants passing through red ruin. Lorca's squad did not speak unless required. Their bolters tracked every hatch, every alcove, every hanging corpse that might conceal movement. They had boarded derelicts before. Sometimes the dead did not remain dead. Sometimes the void brought parasites, pirates, xenos, or worse things that wore the skin of silence. Archimedes Rex held only stillness. That made Lorca suspicious. At Junction Sepulchre 7, they found the first Astartes corpse. It floated half through a broken bulkhead, one arm gone at the shoulder, armor scorched from green to black. The heraldry had been damaged by fire, but not enough. A salamander. His helm was cracked open along the jaw. His face within had frozen in an expression of effort rather than fear. One gauntlet still clutched the haft of a thunderhammer whose head was lodged in something beyond the bulkhead, something too ruined to identify. Kale halted beside the corpse. "Salamanders," he voxed. "Dead?" Lorca asked. "No primary pulse, no secondary pulse, no heat." "Strip him." Kyle turned his helm. "Before we secure the ship?" "His weapon is secured when it is in our hands. His ammunition is secured when it feeds our guns. His plate is secured when it patches ours. Strip him." A pause. Then Kyle obeyed. The Salamander's thunderhammer resisted extraction until two Marines braced themselves and tore it free, bringing with it a frozen mass of flesh and machinery that shattered against the deck. Morcant cut away the dead warrior's grenade bandolier. Brother Solm removed magazines, utility charges, purity seals with usable adamantium clasps, and a functioning helm optic from the cracked faceplate. No words of respect were spoken, no rites were offered. The corpse turned slowly as they worked, one dead hand opening in the absence of gravity as if releasing its claim. They had not yet searched for living crew. To the Marines' Malevolent, the sequence was correct. Dead war gear had value. Dying men had uncertainty. Living allies had objections. Deeper in the forged ship, Tech Marine Harkane found the armories. He reached them by following the vessel's pain. The machine spirit of Archimedes Rex did not speak in words at first. It groaned through deck tremors, static bursts, and locked doors that opened after he threatened them with Binharic damnation. Harkane walked with two servo arms spread above him, mechadendrites tasting the air, his red armor darkened by soot and frost. Where Lorca treated the ship as a carcass, Harkane treated it as a dying saint whose relic bones were not to be wasted. he placed his gauntlet against the sealed armory portal. "By the Omnissiah's wound and the Emperor's wrath," he intoned, voice split between Gothic and machine code. "Recognize necessity. Recognize strength. Recognize the hand that will preserve what lesser guardians have failed to defend." The portal did not open. Harkane's servo arm unfolded a breaching drill. "Then recognize consequence." The machine spirit yielded before the drill touched metal. The armory doors parted with a shriek of frozen seals. For the first time since boarding, the Marines Malevolent were silent for reasons other than discipline. Within lay abundance. Power armor stood in maintenance racks, untouched by battle, some still dull grey beneath primer, some marked for delivery to chapters whose names meant nothing aboard Purgatory except future repainting. Bolters rested in stasis cradles, their casings oiled, their barrels sanctified, their spirits asleep and waiting for hands worthy or merely strong enough to wake them. Crates of mass reactive shells lined the walls, plasma coils, replacement fiber bundles, targeting arrays, Auspex vanes, servo motors, reinforced greaves, chain blade assemblies, jump pack turbines, whirlwind guidance spirits in sealed reliquaries, missile warheads marked for siege, armor piercing, incendiary, and sacred prohibition. Harkane stood among them as a starving man might stand before a corpse-starch vault. Lorcar arrived minutes later, armor scraped white by frost. "Report," the sergeant said. Harkane turned one helm lens toward him. "The ship is dead. Its purpose is not." Lorcar entered the armory. His squad followed, and something like hunger passed among them, though none would have named it that. They saw replacement seals for their cracked armor. They saw bolters not worn to ancient tolerances. They saw shells enough to make the next war less desperate. They saw the shape of survival in metal and oil. "This returns to Purgatory," Lorca said. "All of it," said Harkane. "All that can be carried. Mark what cannot. We will return with lifters. The Mechanicus will object. The Mechanicus should have kept its ship alive." The first Salamander's transmission reached them, while Marines' Malevolent serfs were still being brought through the boarding torpedo. "This is Captain Barkan of the Salamanders. Unknown boarding force aboard Archimedes Rex. Identify yourself and declare intent. We are responding to Mechanicus distress codes and searching for survivors. Do not interfere with rescue operations." Lorcar listened to the vox in silence. Then he opened the channel. "This is Sergeant Lorcar of the Marines Malevolent. The vessel is derelict. Its defenders are dead. Its materiel is claimed by right of necessity." A pause followed. A long one. When Barkan answered, his voice had the controlled heat that seemed bred into the sons of Vulcan. "You will stand down. All material aboard this ship remains under the custody of the Adeptus Mechanicus until lawful redistribution. Our priority is the recovery of survivors. Our priority is war. Your priority is theft. Your opinion has no ammunition value." Another pause. "We are coming aboard." "Then step over the dead quietly. We are working." The Salamanders entered through a separate breach near the forward chapel decks, bringing heat and light into the frozen ship. They moved with flamers, breaching shields, and apothecarian beacons, calling through vox channels for survivors who did not answer. Where the Marines Malevolent had pushed corpses aside, the Salamanders secured them. Where Lorcar's men stripped weapons, Barkan's warriors marked bodies for recovery. The contrast became insult, simply by existing. They met at the armory corridor. The passage was wide enough for mortal cargo haulers, and barely sufficient for the wrath now filling it. Corpses drifted between the two forces, Skitari and serfs, and one dead salamander, whose war gear had already been removed. Machine incense floated in globes around them, disturbed by armor wake and rebreather vents. Frost glittered over the walls. Emergency lumen strips blinked red, then dark, then red again, as if the ship itself feared witnessing what would come. Captain Bakken stood at the head of his squad, helm removed, face dark and scarred, eyes glowing with ember fury. His warriors held boarding shields locked across the width of the corridor. Flamers were angled down but ready, pilot flames whispering blue. Behind them, an apothecary knelt beside a dead tech priest and continued scanning for life signs, either brave or disciplined enough not to look up. Lorcar stood opposite with his bolter raised across his chest. His squad mirrored him. Yellow armor faced green. The dead floated between. Bakken's gaze moved to the stripped salamander corpse behind Lorcar. His jaw tightened. You dishonor the fallen. We recover what war requires. You stripped a brother of his arms before seeking survivors. He was dead. He was Astartes. Then his war gear deserves continued use, not sentimental custody. The flamer in the hands of a salamander to Bakken's right lifted a fraction. Every bolter on the Malevolent side came up. Boarding shields locked harder. The clang traveled through the deck. Bakken's voice dropped. The materiel will be returned to Mechanicus custody. The armor and weaponry taken from my fallen brother will be returned to us. You will withdraw from this vessel until rescue operations are complete. Lorcar did not move. Let Mars come and take it from our hands. The corridor became a trigger pull. No mortal stood between them. That was mercy of a sort. Only Astartes, dead men, and drifting incense occupied the killing ground. Had one weapon fired, the passage would have become a furnace and slaughter tunnel. Flamers would have washed yellow armor in burning promethium. Bolters would have hammered salamander shields until they cracked. Power fists would have met chainswords. The dead would have been joined by legends reduced to meat inside broken plate, all for crates of shells and the right to name theft by a more sacred word. Then Purgatory received the Auspex return. A Salamander's strike cruiser translated from the outer shadow of the derelict, weapons hot, void shields raised, its lance batteries turned with calm, superior certainty toward the Marine's Malevolent vessel. The threat was not spoken at first, because it did not need to be. Purgatory was scarred, hungry, and underarmed. The Salamander's ship had not come to bargain with scavengers. Vineyard's voice entered the channel from orbit. Sergeant Lorcar, my lord. Assessment. The Salamander's object. Irrelevant. Strategic balance. Lorcar looked past Bakken to the shield wall, to the flamer muzzles, to the dead ship around them. Then he reviewed. The orbital data feeding through his helm. They possess superior void position. Then yield the corridor. Lorca's silence lasted one heartbeat too long. Vineyard heard it. Yield the corridor, Sergeant. Strength has spoken. The Marines Malevolent lowered their bolters by degrees, never all at once, never enough to appear humbled. Lorcar stepped back from the armory threshold. His warriors followed. Bakken watched him with disgust, sharpened by restraint. This is not over, the Salamander captain said. Lorcar turned away. It never is. They left Archimedes Rex with less than they wanted, and more than they were owed by any law that clean men would recognize. Crates had vanished into their boarding torpedo before the standoff. Magazines, seals, Auspex components, armor patching systems, a half-dozen bolters, whose absence would become an argument between Mars and paperwork. The Salamanders reclaimed their fallen brother's thunderhammer, but not every grenade, not every plate, not every component taken in the first minutes of discovery. Vineyard accepted the outcome without shame. He had not relented because Bakken was right. He had relented because Bakken's ship had guns enough to make right irrelevant. The Marines Malevolent respected strength. Morality to them was only strength pretending it did not need ammunition. Later, catastrophe corrected the balance. Archimedes Rex did not remain dead. Some failing reactor, some wounded machine spirit, some spiteful automatic defense protocol awoke in its gut after both forces had withdrawn most of their boarding parties. The derelict convulsed. Internal plasma conduits ignited. Docking clamps misfired. A debris storm ripped through the Salamander's strike cruiser's approach vector, shredding its lower batteries and tearing open its launch bays. The green vessel survived, but crippled. Its engines bled light, its shields flickered, its thunderhawks were scattered or destroyed. Salamander squads remained stranded in the forged ship's forward decks as the dead vessel began to break apart. Their distress call came through open vox. Bacon's voice, strained but steady. "All Imperial forces, this is Captain Bacon. We have brothers and Mechanicus personnel trapped aboard the Archimedes Rex. Structural collapse is accelerating. Request immediate extraction." On Purgatory, the strategium was silent. Vineyard stood before the projection of the dying forge ship. Around him, officers and serfs waited. Lorcar stood with his helm beneath one arm, his expression carved from old contempt. Harkane watched the ship's machine spirit die in flickers of red and white across his noospheric feeds. "They would not have answered us," Lorcar said. "No," said Vineyard. "Then leave them." "No." Lorcar looked at his captain. Vineyard did not turn. "Their strike cruiser is crippled. Their boarding forces are stranded. Their recovered materiel remains unsecured." Harkane understood first. His servo arms clicked softly. "You intend rescue. I intend acquisition." The vox opened. "Captain Bacon," Vineyard said. "This is Captain Vineyard of the Marines Malevolent." Static hissed, full of distant impacts and failing bulkheads. "Speak," Bacon replied. "We will extract your warriors." A pause. Lorcar almost smiled. Bacon's answer came slowly. "Name your price." "The munitions and replacement systems recovered from Archimedes Rex by Salamander's forces are to be transferred to my chapter upon successful extraction." "You bargain over brothers' lives." "I bargain because they still have value. Decide quickly. Your vessel is dying." The vox carried nothing for several seconds but the groan of a ship tearing itself open. Then Bacon spoke, each word dragged across pride, rage, and necessity. "Agreed." Vineyard turned to Lorcar. "Launch clause." The Marines Malevolent returned to Archimedes Rex, not as thieves denied, but as saviors with knives behind their backs. Boarding craft punched through collapsing corridors. Yellow-armored squads cut through servitor defense systems, falling debris and vacuum pockets to reach trapped salamanders and surviving Mechanicus adepts. They dragged warriors from fire. They carried gene seed caskets. They hauled half-dead tech priests through corridors where molten metal rained from the ceiling. They saved lives, because the living had purchased rescue with guns, shells, and sacred engines. Bacon was brought aboard Purgatory last, armor scorched, one arm hanging broken, eyes still burning. Vineyard met him in the launch bay amid smoke, wounded salamanders, and crates already being transferred under Harkane's supervision. "You have your lives," Vineyard said. Bacon looked at the munitions, then at him. "And you have your payment." "Yes." "You are a disgrace to the Adeptus Astartes." Vineyard's red lenses regarded him without anger. "We remain alive to be so." Harkane did not oversee every crate. That was the fiction he permitted the others. In the confusion of extraction, while salamanders were pulled from wreckage and Mechanicus adepts shrieked binary laments for their dying ship, one data casket passed beneath his red cloak and into a sealed compartment within his own armor. It had not been listed among the recovered munitions. It had not been declared to Vineyard. Its casing was black iron, old beyond the forged ship's visible systems, marked not with the cog of Mars alone, but with gene-forged warding scripts that predated the second founding. Harkane had found it in a vault the machine spirit had tried to hide even while dying. Later, alone in his sanctum, he placed the casket upon an altar of brass and bone. His servo arms unfolded. Incense burned. The chamber lights dimmed to the red of exposed muscle. The data casket opened after 3 hours of threat, prayer, and violence. Gene-forge annotations crawled across the hololithic field. Most were corrupted. Some were sealed, Some were written in formats abandoned before the Imperium learned to pretend its oldest sins had never happened. At the head of the primary file was a legion numeral. It had been erased, not deleted, not lost, erased by command. But the wound in the record remained, and wounds had shapes. Harkane stared at the empty place where a number should have been, listening to Archimedes Rex die in the distance, and feeling, for the first time in many years, that a machine spirit had whispered something worse than truth. Captain Castor came to Hades' hive through the smoke of his own reputation. His warriors were called the vilifiers, and the name was not ceremonial. It was not carved into honor scrolls by grateful worlds. It was not sung by serfs in the armory halls. It had been given by survivors, by enemies, by imperial commanders who hated requesting their presence, and hated more that the request was always answered with results. When the Marines' Malevolent required a fortress broken, they sent siege squads. When they required armor killed, they sent hunter cadres. When they required a population to understand that survival depended upon obedience, they sent the vilifiers. Castor led them from the forward assault ramp of a Thunderhawk, whose hull had been patched with plates taken from 3 dead vehicles. He was older than his armor, and colder than the ash rain falling around him. His helm was a snarling Mark 7th pattern, with the grille scored by a blade that had almost found his throat a century before. One pauldron bore the chapter badge, sunburst yellow chipped down to grey beneath the icon. The other was black, not by heraldry, but by fire damage left unrepainted. A trophy chain hung from his belt. It carried no skulls, no teeth, no ceremonial tokens, only empty ammunition casings from battles he had survived by stealing from the dead. The vilifiers deployed behind him in silence. Their armor was a catalogue of old wars, scavenged greaves, rebuilt helms, gauntlets not fitted to their original suits, bolters with worn casings and hand-cut kill marks, chainswords whose teeth had been replaced so often that no original piece remained except the hateful machine spirit within. They looked like executioners raised from a scrapyard and blessed by a priest who had forgotten mercy. Castor's mission had been delivered by Captain Vineyard in 9 words. Retrieve the officers. Their command codes unlock artillery grids. Not save, not rescue, retrieve.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
The captured officers mattered only because the guns of Hades' hive were still slave to their authorization signets and vocal ciphers. 3 batteries of Earthshaker platforms, 2 macro mortar shrines, and 1 ancient defense laser sat dormant, while orcs hammered at the lower precincts. The enemy had taken the officers alive during the collapse of Bastion Val, and since then, the greenskins had turned the ruins into a den of noise, trophies, and crude spectacle. The vilifiers entered the collapsed habways beneath the bastion at a walking pace. The air was wet with heat. Promethium fires burned in broken stairwells. Smoke moved through the corridors in greasy layers. Dead civilians and guardsmen clogged the passages, swollen by rot, split by gas, gnawed by rats, flies, and things too small for names. Some had been nailed to walls with bayonets. Some had been stacked into barricades by orcs who liked how soft humans became under boots. Orc glyphs had been painted across the ferrocrete in blood, crude loops and tusked faces, and jagged marks of ownership. The paint was not old. It still ran in places. Vox speakers hung from the ceilings on ripped cables, broadcasting human screams. The orcs had recorded them. Some were pleas, some were prayers, some were the raw animal sound made when pain stripped language from a man. The greenskins had looped the recordings through looted Imperial Vox units and amplified them until the habways seemed alive with torment. Every corridor shrieked. Every junction begged. Every broken chamber echoed with the last moments of men already dead. Brother Balak laughed once through his helm grill. Crude. Castor did not look back. Effective. Against mortals. Mortals are most of what exists. Balak carried a heavy chainsword in one hand and a bolt pistol in the other. His armor had once been standard yellow, but so many plates had been replaced that he resembled a shrine assembled from battlefield wreckage. He had served under Castor since before Armageddon, and had the disposition of a blade left in brine. He distrusted any virtue that did not fit inside a magazine. The Black Templars joined them at the third descent. They came from a side tunnel in black plate and white tabards greyed by ash. Their Crusader crosses were marked in clean bone white, despite the filth of the hive. They moved with a fury held in ritual restraint, chainswords idle but ready, bolters locked to their breastplates. At their head strode sword brother Vorda, his helm shaped like a knight's death mask, a red wax oath seal still clinging to his gorget, though the parchment had burned away. "You are late," Castor said. Vorda's helm turned toward him. "We were purging the eastern breach. You failed to keep the officers from capture. We held the breach for 9 hours against a tide no mortal regiment could withstand. Yet the officers are captured." One of the Templars growled through his vox. Vorda lifted a hand, and the sound died. "We are here now," said the Black Templar. "The Emperor's justice will be done." Balak stepped past a mound of bodies and kicked a severed orc head from his path. "Justice, honor, oaths. You carry heavy words into narrow tunnels, Templar. Mind they do not slow your blade." Vorda faced him fully. "Honor is the armor of the soul." "Then your soul requires better maintenance. Mine has survived unarmored. You speak like a renegade. I speak like a warrior who knows the dead do not rise to applaud correct conduct." Vorda's hand rested on the hilt of his chainsword. Trophies taken from the unworthy, ammunition stripped from allies, civilians spent like sand before a tide. Is there any shame your chapter will not call necessity? Balak's helm lenses glowed dull red in the smoke. Shame is vanity for men who expect witnesses. Honor is vanity for men who expect songs. We expect neither. Castor cut across them. "Enough. Save your sermons for the orcs. They enjoy noise." They advanced together, because circumstance had made refusal inefficient. The Habways descended into the old transit bones beneath Hades, where trains had once carried laborers between manufactoria and shrine districts. Now the tunnels had been widened by explosions and brute force. Tank wrecks had been dragged below and welded into walls. Chains hung from overhead rails. Bones had been sorted by size into piles. Human femurs here, skulls there, arms and hands strung like devotional garlands by creatures that had never understood devotion, except as a reason to fight. The ambush came at a collapsed junction, where the floor was slick with oil. Castor saw the trap an instant before it closed. Too many corpses facing the wrong direction. Too many glyphs painted high, where orcs would have needed ladders or stacked bodies. Too little noise beyond the screams on the vox. He raised his fist. The floor detonated. Not beneath them, around them. Charges buried in the walls blew inward, collapsing the passage ahead and behind. From murder holes cut through the wreckage, orcs opened fire with crude shooters, looted heavy stubbers, and rotary cannons bolted to scrap frames. The corridor became thunder and sparks. Rounds hammered Astartes' plate. A Black Templar took a shell through the throat seal and fell backward, blood spraying from his helm in a pulsing arc. A Marine Malevolent beside him answered with a bolter burst that turned the nearest murder hole into a fountain of meat. Then the ceiling split. Orcs dropped through on chains. They came laughing, huge and scarred, armor plates clattering, blades in both hands. One landed on a Templar and drove a hook through his shoulder joint, dragging him down beneath green bodies. Another struck Balak hard enough to dent his breastplate, tusks scraping across yellow ceramite before Balak rammed his pistol into its mouth and blew the back of its skull over the wall. Castor killed 3 in the first seconds. His chainsword opened the first from groin to sternum. His bolt pistol burst the second through the eye. He caught the third by the throat and crushed hard enough to collapse its windpipe before throwing it under Vorda's blade. The Templar killed it without thanks. The ambush should have failed there. Against lesser warriors, it would have been massacre. Against Astartes, it became butcher's work. Then the floor beneath the corridor dropped. It was not collapse, it was design. The orcs had cut the supports and held the platform with chains. When the chains were severed, the entire section fell into darkness. Astartes, orcs, corpses, wreckage, and burning cables plunged together. Castor hit metal hard enough to crack his visor display. His armor absorbed the impact, but not cleanly. Warning runes flashed across his vision. Around him, warriors crashed down among tank hulls, bones, scrap, and burning barrels. Something heavy landed on his left leg and slid away. An orc. Dead. Its head had burst on impact, leaving his greaves slick with brain matter. Light roared around him. They had fallen into an arena. It had been built from tank wreckage, hab girders, chains, bones, cargo containers, and the upended carcasses of Imperial vehicles. Promethium barrels burned around the perimeter, feeding the air with oily orange flame. Thousands of orcs crowded the stacked scrap terraces, roaring, laughing, pounding weapons against armor, shoving one another for a better view. Some wagered teeth. Some hurled severed hands into the pit. Some fired guns into the ceiling, because silence was an enemy too. At the far end of the arena, bound to an artillery limber, the captured Imperial officers hung in chains. 2 were dead. 1 was missing his legs. 1 lived with his eyes open and lips moving around what might have been a prayer or the command cipher the orcs had failed to understand. A massive knob rose from a throne made of chimera tracks and skulls. It wore a commissar's coat stretched across its shoulders like a rag. A power claw clicked on one arm. In the other hand, it held a loudhailer taken from a command tank. "Look at this," it bellowed. "More beaky lads, black uns and yellow uns. They fight good. They die loud. Maybe they kill each other loud too." The arena answered with a roar. The surviving Astartes rose in the pit. Castor counted fast. 3 vilifiers standing. Balak alive. 2 Black Templars alive. Vorder alive. Others either dead, buried beneath debris, or dragged away by orcs on chains. The knob pointed its claw at Balak and Vorder. "Dat one, and dat one. Fight." Orcs surged forward along the rim, shooters and cannons aimed downward. Heavy weapons, too many to weather in the open without cover. The greenskins did not want an execution. They wanted theatre. Theatre could be used. Balak looked at Vorder. Vorder looked back. "I will not perform for Xenos," the Templar said. Balak revved his chainsword. "Then die principled under their guns. You would indulge them. I would stand close enough to kill them." Vorder's gaze shifted, taking in the arena, the barrels, the fuel lines feeding them, the chains supporting the scrap galleries, the officers beyond. Castor saw him understand. So did Balak. The 2 warriors stepped into the center of the pit. The orcs lost themselves in delight. "Fight! Fight! Fight! Fight!" The chant shook rust from the walls. Balak attacked first, because he had no patience for ritual. His chainsword struck Vorder's blade with a scream of teeth and sparks. The Black Templar met him with brutal precision, parrying, stepping, answering with a cut that scored yellow armor across the ribs. Balak gave ground by choice, letting the fight drift toward the nearest Promethium line. Vorder pressed him, every strike convincing, every motion true enough that even Castor could not tell how much hatred had become performance. "Your brother died above," Balak voxed across a private channel. "The one with the split throat. He died in honor. He died because he stood too high and too slow." Vorder's next blow nearly took Balak's arm. Perhaps the duel was not entirely performance. Balak laughed and slammed his shoulder into the Templar's chest, driving them both closer to the fuel drums. The orcs howled approval. One leaned too far over the barrier, waving a chain axe and screaming for blood. Castor shot him through the face. The orcs beside the dead one cheered, because it had been sudden and messy. "Louder!" roared the knob. "Make it loud!" Balak disengaged, fired his bolt pistol into a promethium feed pipe, and threw himself flat. Vorder moved at the same instant, hurling a grenade into the rupture. The first explosion was small. The second found the barrels. The arena became a sunken hell. Promethium erupted along the wall in a rolling sheet of fire, climbing the stacked scrap terraces and swallowing the nearest orc spectators whole. They burned magnificently. Fat, muscle, oil, and ammunition cooked together. Some staggered screaming. Some laughed until their lungs ignited. Armor plates glowed red around bodies, liquefying inside them. A heavy weapon magazine detonated and tore an entire section of the crowd apart, raining cooked greenskin meat into the pit. Castor was already moving. "Officers," he voxed. The vilifiers advanced through flame and falling bodies. Bolters hammered. Orcs dropped from the galleries, some burning, some furious, all eager. Castor blew one in half at the waist. A second hit him from the side and drove him into a wrecked Lehman Russ hull. He jammed his chainsword under its chin and carved up through skull and helm until the weapon burst free in a spray of gore. Balak and Vorder fought back to back for 13 seconds. It was long enough. Balak ruptured another fuel tank with a crack grenade. Vorder cut through a support chain with his power sword. The eastern gallery tore loose from the wall and collapsed into the arena, dropping hundreds of orcs into the pit, along with tons of scrap iron and burning wreckage. The impact split the floor. Ancient transit rails buckled. A buried promethium main, still pressurized from some forgotten manufacturing system, ruptured beneath them. Castor reached the officers as the ground began to shake. The living one stared at him with a face emptied by pain. "Command codes," Castor said. The officer blinked. Castor seized him by the jaw, careful not to crush the bone before the words could form. "Speak the codes, or I leave you to the Xenos." The officer sobbed them into the vox. Castor recorded every syllable. Then the arena opened. The explosion did not simply burn. It lifted. The floor heaved upward in a wave of metal, flame, and pulverized bone. Promethium flashed through the lower galleries and cooked the orcs in their own armor. Bodies burst as internal gases ignited. Scrap walls blew outward. Tank hulls spun like toys. The knob on its throne vanished inside a blossom of white flame, its laughter cut short by the detonation of the shells stacked beneath its seat. The arena tore itself apart beneath Hades' hive. Castor awoke beneath wreckage with a dead orc across his chest, and the officer's severed hand locked in his fist. The signet ring remained on the finger. Good enough. Balak lived long enough to climb from the ruin. Vorder found him in a side passage where fires burned low, and the vox screams had finally died. The Black Templar's armor was cracked. His sword was broken near the tip. Balak's left side had been opened by shrapnel, and one of his lungs was pulsing wetly, through a rent in his plate. "You fought well," Vorder said. Balak leaned against the wall, bolt pistol hanging in his hand. "Do not make it sentimental. My brother died in the ambush. Many brothers die. You mocked him. I described him." Vorder stood over him. Balak raised his pistol, but too slowly. The Templar's blade punched through the damaged seam beneath his breastplate and drove into both hearts. Balak stiffened. Blood poured down his yellow armor. His helm tilted, as if considering the wound with professional interest. "Honor," he rasped, "is expensive." Vorder withdrew the blade. Balak slid down the wall and died seated among ash, blood, and orc teeth. When Castor found him, the Black Templar was gone. The vilifier captain looked at the body, at the wound, at the missing ammunition from Balak's belt, and understood enough. He opened a command channel to Vineyard. "Brother Balak is dead." "Enemy action?" Vineyard asked. Castor looked down the tunnel where Vorder had departed. "Action sufficient to kill him." A pause. "Dishonor?" "No. Betrayal is only weakness if it fails." "So recorded." Castor left Balak where he sat. Recovery would come if the battle allowed it. The battle rarely did. On the surface, Hades' hive shook under renewed orc assault. Greenskin mobs had broken through a guard district near the lower Manufactoria and were pouring toward the inner artillery shrines. Imperial commanders were screaming for permission to redirect guns, but the command grids had remained sealed. Castor transmitted the dead officer's vocal cipher and pressed the severed signet hand against his gauntlet reader. The artillery grid woke. Earthshaker platforms turned, macro mortars elevated, ancient defense guns accepted target coordinates. A guard major came over the Vox, voice raw with panic. "My lord, those coordinates are still occupied. We have 3 regiments in that district." Castor watched the Auspex. Orc heat signatures spread through the zone like infection. Human icons flickered among them, trapped, surrounded, already dying in thousands. "If the district falls," said the major, "the inner line is exposed." "Yes," Castor replied. "My lord, our men are still there." "Then they will hold the enemy in place." He authorized the fire mission. Across Hades' hive, Imperial guns spoke with the voices of buried gods. Shells rose and fell. The still occupied guard district disappeared beneath detonations. Its streets, defenders, attackers, wounded, banners, guns, and prayers crushed into one vast furnace of useful death. Castor listened until the Vox filled with static. Then he turned back toward the war. Librarian Iovac did not walk among his brothers. He was permitted to march behind them. There was a difference, and aboard Purgatory, every difference had been sharpened until it could draw blood. The Marines Malevolent did not deny his rank. They did not deny the sigils worked into his blue and yellow warplate, nor the horned skull embossed upon his psychic hood, nor the sanction brands burned into the flesh beneath his armor. He had passed the trials. He had endured the Scholastica Psychana's knives and chains. He had stood before the chapter's own wardens and survived every test of purity, control, and obedience. His name was written in the Librarius records. His gene seed tithe was accounted. His war record was long, brutal, and useful. None of that made him trusted. He was a weapon, and the Marines Malevolent understood weapons. They oiled them. They loaded them. They pointed them where the enemy was thickest and expected them to function until they failed. But a weapon that whispered to the warp was never embraced. It was locked away between uses. It was chained even when carried. It was watched. Iovac was watched always. He ate alone when he ate at all. In truth, the chapter's warriors did not eat as mortals understood the act, but even the crude communion of nutrient slabs and recycled protein paste in the arming halls was denied him by custom older than any living serf could explain. When the brothers of Second Company gathered before deployment, Iovac stood apart beneath the gaze of purity seals and gun servitors. When the chaplains intoned the catechisms of hatred, no warrior stood unhelmed within his reach. When the company bowed their heads before the Reclusium's skull shrines, Iovac remained at the threshold, his psychic hood sealed, his thoughts wrapped in iron discipline. He had saved brothers from witches, demons, Xeno's mind blades, and the screaming madness of the warp. They called him necessary. They did not call him brother unless the Vox was open and the enemy could hear. Halvek Mordain found him in a chamber that had once been a meditation cell and had since become a cage pretending to be a shrine. The room was narrow, ribbed in black iron, its walls inscribed with wards of hexagrammic script and crude chapter litanies scratched over older prayers. A brass aquila hung inverted from the ceiling, not in heresy, but by damage left unrepaired. Chains lay coiled on the floor, each link etched with warding sigils. A brazier burned with incense strong enough to sting Halvek's eyes and coat his tongue with bitterness. Servo skulls drifted in the corners, their lenses fixed upon the chamber's sole occupant. Iovac knelt on the bare deck. He was unhelmed, and that alone made him seem more dangerous. His head had been shaved down to scarred scalp. Cables ran from the sockets behind his ears into the psychic hood folded around his gorget. His skin was the grey pallor of a man who had spent too much of his life inside void ships and visions. His eyes were black, not wholly, but deep enough that the pupils seemed to have swallowed the iris. Sanction brands marked his brow and cheeks, pale scars over darker ritual burns. A thin trickle of dried blood ran from one nostril to his lip. 2 Marines Malevolent stood at the door, bolters held low. Neither had removed his helm. Halvek entered with Gethro behind him, and no stormtroopers. It was not courage, it was calculation. Armed men meant less in a chamber where thought itself could become a blade. Better to bring an auto-savant, a rosette, and the kind of authority that forced hesitation before violence. Iovak opened his eyes. "Inquisitor," he said. His voice was soft. That surprised Halvek. Most Astartes' voices filled rooms by nature. Iovak's voice seemed to remain close to his own mouth, as if afraid of what might follow it into the air. "Librarian Iovak," Halvek said. "You know why I am here. You seek a dead number." Gethro stopped breathing for several seconds. Halvek did not look at him. "Then you know more than I was told. I know less than I dream. Dreams are not testimony. No, they are wounds that refuse to close." Halvek circled him once, careful not to step across the ward chains. "Your chapter's gene records contain sealed references to the 11th Protocol. Its Macarian censure files refer to pre-heresy aggression markers. Your tech marine recovered forbidden gene forge annotations from Archimedes Rex. Apothecary Sorn has hidden at least one progenoid irregularity from the chapter's open apothecarian archive. I want to know whether your chapter's hatred is cultural, genetic, or engineered." The 2 guards at the door shifted. Iovak's gaze did not leave Halvek. "Those are 3 comforting lies," he said. "Explain." "Culture is blame placed upon the dead. Gene seed is blame placed upon the father. Engineering is blame placed upon forgotten hands. All allow the living to say, 'It was done to us.' All allow the blade to deny the cut. You speak like a confessor. I speak like a weapon that hears the thoughts of men as they die." Halvek leaned closer. The incense smoke moved between them in slow, dirty ribbons. "You have seen the Father." The chamber grew colder, not by machinery, not by failing atmosphere, by attention. Even the servo skulls seemed to drift more quietly. Iovak closed his eyes again. Blood welled fresh at his nostril. "I have seen a figure where a statue should stand," he whispered. "I have seen a hall of heroes with one plinth empty and no dust upon it, as if hands still clean it in secret. I have seen a banner with the device burned away. I have seen sons kneeling in ranks beneath an eclipsed sun, while men in gold and black commanded them to forget the shape of the face that made them. I have heard a name swallowed by thunder before it reached me." Halvek felt his heartbeat slow. "Which Primarch?" Iovak smiled without humor. "There is no statue, no name, no mourning rites. That is the point, Inquisitor. Was he damned? I do not know. Was he traitor? I do not know. Was he purged for corruption?" Iovak's eyes opened. They were wet now, not with tears, but with the pressure of something straining behind them. "I have dreamed of a Primarch without a tomb," he said. "Not a monster, not a saint. A blade taken from its owner and hidden because the cut it made displeased those who wrote the victory." Halvek said nothing for a moment. Around them, the ship groaned as orbital recoil shuddered through its bones. Somewhere below, guns fired into Armageddon's atmosphere. Somewhere deeper, men worked, bled, prayed, and died in the service of yellow giants who did not love them. "Does Vineyard know?" The answer came from the doorway. "Some truths are not hidden because they are false." Captain Vineyard entered without invitation. The guard stepped aside. Gethro bowed so quickly, his spine clicked. Halvek did not turn at once. He let the insult settle, then faced the captain of the Marines Malevolent. Vineyard wore his helm, as always. His armor still bore scratches from the shelling of the command precinct, and there was dried orc blood in the joints of his right gauntlet. He filled the chamber until it seemed smaller, less a cell than a container for violence. "You interrupt an inquisitorial interrogation," Halvek said. "I prevent misuse of chapter property. Eovac is an Adeptus Astartes of the Imperium, not your property." Vineyard looked at the kneeling librarian. "Everything that kills for the chapter belongs to the chapter." Eovac did not react. Halvek stepped between them. "Then answer in his place. What do you know of the 11th protocol?" Vineyard's helm lenses glowed red through the incense. "I know that dead records remain dead for a reason. That reason may be treason, or utility. You would preserve a lie if it kept your chapter armed. I would preserve a plague if it killed orcs before it killed us." Halvek's hand moved to the rosette at his throat. "Careful, Captain." "No." Vinya's voice dropped into something almost gentle. "You be careful, Inquisitor. You think truth is a blade you can draw and sheathe at will. You think archives obey the same laws as flesh. They do not. Some truths are ammunition. Some are toxins. Some are engines buried beneath the foundations of the Imperium. Dig carelessly, and you will not uncover history. You will trigger it." Eovac exhaled sharply. Every lumen in the chamber flickered. Gethro whispered a prayer. The incense smoke twisted against the air current. Then it twisted against no air current at all. Eovac's chains began to tremble. Vineyard turned his helm toward him. "What have you done?" Halvek answered before the librarian could. "I questioned him. You pressed a psyker aboard my ship while Armageddon dies beneath us." The deck bucked. This time it was not gun recoil. A scream rose through the Vox system. It began as mortal agony, then lengthened into something too wet, too layered, too amused by the damage it made in every ear that heard it. The chamber lights died. Emergency lumens ignited red. The ward scripts on the walls flared hot enough to smoke. A klaxon howled, then another. Then the lower deck Vox became a chorus. "Contact in Maintenance Cathedral 9. Life signs multiplying. Negative Auspex coherence. By the throne, they are inside the walls. Blood pressure failure in deck surfs. Shapes in the steam. Shapes in the steam. Shapes in the steam." The last voice became laughter, and then meat being torn through a grill. Vineyard drew his bolt pistol. "Eovac," he said. The librarian was already standing. The chains at his feet dragged across the deck, as if reluctant to release him. His psychic hood hummed. Blood now ran freely from both nostrils and one ear. "It is below," he said. "It heard the dead world. It heard me look backward." "Seal him," said one of the guards. Vineyard raised a hand. "No, aim him." The maintenance cathedrals of Purgatory had been built in the old manor, when even engines were expected to suffer beneath archers and saints. Halvek descended with Vineyard, Eovac, Turok, and 2 squads of Marines Malevolent through ribbed access shafts and iron stairwells, slick with condensation. Heat rose from below. The air grew thick with oil vapor and copper stink. Servo skulls lay broken on the steps. Their lenses burst from within. A serf crawled past them on hands and knees, eyes gone, his mouth packed with black feathers that moved as if breathing. Turok shot him without slowing. The first demon met them at the threshold of Maintenance Cathedral 9. It had made itself from smoke, sinew, and stolen anatomy. Its limbs were too long, its torso too narrow, its skin a shifting membrane of faces pressed outward from within. It wore the suggestion of a guardsman's flak vest stretched across a frame of impossible bone. Its mouth opened down to the sternum and spoke in the voices of everyone who had died at Emperor's deliverance. "Useful," it crooned. Vineyard fired. The bolt shell entered the thing's chest and detonated. Meat became smoke. Smoke became teeth. The demon folded backward, then unfolded from its own wound, laughing with the mouths in its skin. Turok's squad opened fire. Bolters roared in the cathedral dark. The sound was immense, trapped beneath iron arches and machine shrines, each shot a thunderclap that punched demonic flesh apart. The creatures came through steam vents, service tunnels, prayer alcoves, and the open grates of the deck. Some crawled upside down on the walls. Some dragged themselves forward as masses of hands. Some wore the shapes of dead serfs badly, like armor stolen from a smaller corpse. Bolter shells blasted them into smoke, and the smoke became limbs again. Chainswords screamed through bodies that re-knit inside their own wounds. Promethium washed across the floor, burning shapes that laughed as they became silhouettes of ash, and then stepped out of themselves. The Marines Malevolent fought without fear, not because they were pure, not because they trusted the Emperor to preserve them, because fear was another resource, and they would not spend it on things that lacked the decency to die properly. Turok drove his chainsword through a demon's skull, split it to the navel, then crushed the two halves beneath his boots as they tried to crawl apart. Brother Morkant was lifted by a creature made of hooked arms and torn open from hip to throat. His organs spilled hot across the deck. He fought on for 8 seconds, firing his bolt pistol into the thing's face, until his secondary heart failed and the demon dragged him into the steam. Vineyard stepped after it and emptied a magazine into both shapes, brother and demon alike, until nothing remained but shredded yellow plate and evaporating filth. Halvek fired his Inferno pistol until the charge cell ran dry. The beam reduced one creature to bubbling sludge. Then the sludge screamed in the voice of Colonel Holt and tried to crawl into his boot seals. Eovac walked past him. The Librarian's force staff burned with witchlight restrained by iron will. He spoke no grand incantation, no noble prayer. His lips moved around words too old for comfort and too sharp for sane memory. The air around him folded. The demons noticed him as wolves notice a bleeding animal. They came for him all at once. Vineyard saw it. Hold them. The Marines Malevolent formed a wall of ceramite and hatred. Demons struck them in a tide. Claws shrieked across armor. Teeth found seal joints. Astartes fired point blank, blades rising and falling, boots stamping, fists breaking things that had no true bones. Turok lost 2 fingers to a mouth that opened in the palm of a child-sized hand. He crushed the limb under his boot and kept firing. Lorcar's old bolter jammed after a demon's blood turned to rust inside the ejection port. He used the weapon as a club until Harkane, arriving through the smoke with servo arms spread, burned the corruption out with a plasma cutter and curses in Binharik. Eovac reached the center of the cathedral. There, beneath the maintenance shrine's great brass aquila, the breach pulsed. It was not a hole in the air. Holes were honest. This was a thought in reality where reality had begun agreeing with the wrong mind. The air bled colors. Voices poured from it. Armageddon's dead pressed against the other side, not as souls saved or damned, but as echoes, agony, psychic weight. The demons had used that weight as a door. Eovac looked into it. Halvek saw him change. The Librarian became very still. His face, visible beneath the raised hood plates, slackened not in weakness, but in surrender to calculation. He could close the wound. The question was not whether he had the strength. The question was what he would burn to do it. Eovac placed both hands upon his force staff and drove its iron ferrule into the deck. The scream that followed did not come from his throat. It came from his mind. Every mortal in the cathedral fell. Halvek struck the deck hard, hands clamped over his ears, though the sound was inside his skull. Gethro, somewhere behind the line, began reciting multiplication tables in High Gothic until blood poured from his mouth. The demons recoiled. The Marines Malevolent staggered but held, boots grinding into the deck, helms sparking, auto-senses overloading. Eovac burned memory first. Halvek felt it happen, not saw, felt. Names vanished from the air. Faces, battles, the taste of old nutrient paste in a training cage. The sound of a chaplain calling him weapon instead of brother. A dead serf's kindness. A world with blue rain. The first time he had heard the warp whisper and not answered. Pieces of the librarian's self became fuel, fed into the psychic wound and ignited. The breach shrank. The demons screamed. Eovac burned deeper. A portion of his mind went dark with a finality that made Halvek's teeth ache. The librarian's left eye burst in its socket, spilling black blood down his cheek. His psychic hood flared white-hot. The ward scripts across the cathedral walls ignited one by one, threads of light racing toward the breach and stitching it shut. The last demon reached him as the wound closed. It had Vineyard's voice. It had Halvek's eyes. It had the smile of a Primarch no one was allowed to remember. It leaned close to Eovac and whispered something that made the librarian sob once. Then the breach collapsed inward. The demon became smoke. The smoke became nothing. Silence returned to Maintenance Cathedral 9, broken only by fire, leaking pipes, the groans of wounded serfs, and the cooling clicks of bolters. Eovac remained standing for 3 heartbeats. Then he fell. Vineyard reached him first. For one absurd instant, Halvek thought the captain might help him rise. Instead, Vineyard looked down at the unconscious librarian and spoke to Tuarok. "Chain him." Halvek pushed himself upright. Blood ran from his nose. His skull felt cracked from within. "He saved your ship." He opened the door. "You know that is not the whole truth. It is enough of it." Tuarok and another Marine bound Eovac in ward chains, while his remaining eye fluttered beneath a half-closed lid. The librarian's mouth moved, soundless. Halvek rounded on Vineyard. "You thank nothing. You honor nothing. Not even what preserves you." Vineyard holstered his pistol. Gratitude is not containment. He sacrificed part of his mind. Then less remains to betray him. The answer was so immediate, so utterly without malice, that Halvek understood something he had not before. The Marines Malevolent did not fear corruption, as other chapters feared it. The Salamanders feared the loss of humanity. The Black Templars feared impurity and oath-breaking. The Ultramarines feared disorder. The Space Wolves feared dishonor hidden behind civilization's mask. But the Marines Malevolent feared dependence. They feared weakness. They feared any power that could not be beaten into obedience, stripped from a corpse, bolted into armor, or aimed downrange. They did not hate Eovac because he was a psyker. They hated that they needed him. As Tuarok dragged the chained librarian from the cathedral floor, Eovac's remaining eye opened. It fixed on Halvek. For a moment, his ruined mind pushed through the drugs, the chains, the warding sigils, and the damage he had done to himself. His lips moved. This time sound came with them. "The buried father," he whispered. Halvek stepped closer. Vineyard turned. Eovac's voice was barely human, barely Astartes, scraped raw by prophecy and loss. The buried father did not fall. His eye rolled white. He was judged inconvenient. The galaxy was split, and the wound did not heal. Where the great rift burned across the stars, it did not resemble a line on a cartograph or a wound upon a body. Such comparisons were made by men who had never looked upon it without filters, wards, and sanctioned prayer. It was a scream made visible. It was the warp clawing through reality's throat. It was color without mercy, light without illumination, madness wide enough to divide the emperors, realm into sundered halves. Beyond that wound lay the Imperium Nihilus. Ships there did not travel so much as gamble with damnation. Astropaths sang until their eyes bled and their tongues split. Navigators aged decades in voyages that should have taken weeks. Worlds cried out and were not heard. Reinforcements arrived to find the living extinct, the faithful corrupted, the dead enthroned in churches built from their own bones. Hope, already a rare and fragile heresy, became something spoken of in past tense. It was through that darkness that the convoy came, It was not large enough to be called a fleet by the standards of old crusades, but it carried cargo more precious than the lives of the men guarding it. A handful of Imperial escorts, a Mechanicus ark, its hull armored in red and black iron, bearing sealed gene vaults and cryo-reliquaries. 2 troop carriers filled with mortal armsmen, medici adepts, tech thralls, and chapter serfs assigned to future service. At the heart of the convoy, warded by golden transponder codes and the silence of forbidden authority, rested Primaris gene tech. Not merely organs, not merely armor plans, not merely Call's blasphemous brilliance folded into sanctioned miracle. It was possibility, reinforcement for chapters too broken to rebuild by old tithe, replacement for gene lines running thin, a future carried in caskets of black adamantium and stasis glass. The Adeptus Custodes guarded it. Shield Captain Asterion Val stood upon the strategium deck of the Arc Bellum Viator, while the void outside became teeth. He wore auramite plate, engraved with oaths, older than most imperial sectors. His guardian spear rested in one hand, as if weightless. Around him, mortal officers, Mechanicus Magi, and shipmasters spoke in low urgency. None dared panic loudly in the presence of the Emperor's own. The custodian's helm was maglocked to his hip, his face calm, severe, and beautiful, in the terrible manner of something made to stand beside gods and not kneel. The first bioship emerged from the dark ahead of them, blotting out a field of stars. Then another, then hundreds, the void filled with living hunger. Tyrannid hive ships came not in formation, but in instinctive convergence, massive organic silhouettes sliding through space like continents of chitin and muscle. Their carapaces were ridged with spines large enough to impale frigates. Tendrils longer than cities trailed behind them, twitching in the vacuum. Mouths opened along their flanks where no mouths should have been, each one lined with teeth of bone and mineral, each one exhaling clouds of spores that shimmered like dust motes in the light of dying suns. The Imperial escorts opened fire. Lance beams cut across the dark. Macro cannon broadsides rolled from gun decks in thunderous procession. Torpedoes burned contrails through the spore clouds and detonated against chitinous hides. The first hive ship shuddered under the impacts, its flank rupturing, spilling oceans of dark fluid into the void. The wound sealed around the fire. The creature turned, slow and patient, and continued forward. Then the spores reached the convoy shields. Void shields were made to turn aside energy, shell, and lance. They were not meant to listen to hunger. The spore clouds spread across them like mold across glass, burning, clinging, gnawing through layers of protective force with chemical malice and impossible biological adaptation. Shield runes turned amber, then red. One escort, the St. Gelvius, lost its forward shields and vanished beneath a cloud of feeder organisms that struck its hull like rain. The creatures ate through armor plate. They poured through gun ports. They flooded decks. The ship's final Vox transmission lasted 48 seconds. Men shouted about things in the walls. A priest tried to finish the litany of true aim. Someone screamed that the ammunition hoists were full of claws. Then the bridge feed showed the captain torn in half by a thing with too many limbs and no eyes, his intestines pulled across the command throne as if the organism were unspooling cable. The St. Gelvius rolled out of formation, still firing from half its batteries, then broke apart when a bioship's tendrils wrapped around its spine and squeezed until the plasma drives ruptured. Imperial escorts died by the 1,000 souls. Boarding organisms struck next. They came in cysts fired from the hive ships, wet meteors sheathed in bone. They punched into hulls and cracked open like eggs. Hormagaunts spilled from them in tides of blade limbs and shrieking hunger. Termagants crawled through ruptured ventilation shrines, firing living ammunition that burrowed into flesh and detonated in nests of acid. Feeder organisms flooded lower decks in carpets, stripping the skin from men who fell and leaving skeletons twitching inside their uniforms. A Mechanicus Magos burst into the strategium, half his torso eaten, robes aflame, mechadendrites lashing in damaged confusion. "My Lord Custodian," he blurted in Binharican blood. "The vault levels are compromised. Bioforms have entered the aft sanctum. Probability of convoy survival below viable threshold." Asterion Val looked through the forward viewport, where another escort burned open, its crew venting into the dark as glittering clouds of frozen blood. "Prepare emergency translation." The navigator was already dead. "Prepare teleportation," the shield captain amended. The Magos' remaining eye lens clicked. "Destination?" Val turned to the hololithic display. A world spun beneath them, wreathed in ash cloud and volcanic discharge. Loke 2. A death world of black highlands, sulfur seas, lava channels, and toxic storms. No hive cities, no civilized refuge, no sanctuary save terrain too hateful for easy digestion. "There," he said. "My lord, the atmosphere is lethal to unprotected humans." "Then the unprotected humans are already dead." The order went out. The gene vaults were sealed inside teleport cages. Custodian wardens formed around them in a ring of auramite and absolute purpose. Mortal survivors begged for inclusion. Some were dragged into the teleportarium by serfs who still understood priority. Most remained behind, firing laser guns into the corridor mouths as Tyranids came over the barricades. Asterion Val watched the last armsman at the teleportarium door recite the Emperor's name, while a lictor unfolded from the ceiling above him. The teleport flash took the custodians before the man finished dying. Loke 2 received them in fire. The highlands were volcanic teeth thrust through a choking atmosphere. Black stone ridges rose through curtains of yellow fume. Lava ran in rivers below, bright and slow, illuminating the underside of toxic cloud banks. The air hissed against armor seals. Ash fell constantly, fine as powdered glass. Lightning moved inside the smoke without thunder, as if sound itself had been strangled by the planet's throat. The gene vaults materialized upon a basalt plateau between two lava channels. So did 23 custodian wardens, 12 Mechanicus adepts, 6 surviving armsmen, and half a teleport cage fused through a tech priest who had no time to scream before his body came apart. Asterion Val rose from the teleport impact, with Guardian Spear already leveled. The Tyranids fell from the sky minutes later. Mycetic spores hammered into the highlands around them, cracking stone, hatching into wet horror. Gaunts poured out by the hundreds, then by the thousands. Warriors followed, towering above them, bone swords raised, chitins steaming in the volcanic fumes. Raveners burst from the ground in sprays of black gravel. Gargoyles circled through the smoke, screeching as their wings beat acid vapor into whirls. The custodes made their stand around the gene tech. They killed in impossible numbers. Guardian spears fired mass reactive rounds that punched through Tyranid skulls and burst inside their nerve clusters. Blades of auramite and disruption fields severed limbs, heads, torsos, and talons in strokes too precise for mortal comprehension. Custodian wardens moved as living statues, each step exact, each kill economical, each motion carrying the weight of 10,000 years of perfected violence. They did not roar, they did not boast, they did not pray aloud. Their duty was older than noise. The swarm did not care. It piled corpses into ramps. Gaunts died climbing over dead gaunts. Warriors used the bodies as inclines to breach the custodian firing lanes. Gargoyles fell burning into heaps, and other Tyranids scrambled over their twitching wings. The dead became terrain within minutes. Purple ichor steamed on black stone. Limbs spasmed in heaps. Severed heads clicked mandibles at nothing. A warden lost one arm to a carnifex talon and killed the beast by driving his spear through its mouth, down its throat, and into the cluster of organs beneath its spine. He died beneath the next wave, still standing until enough claws found the gaps. The living ring grew smaller. Above Loke 2, The Void War worsened. That was when Purgatory arrived. The Marines Malevolent, translated from the warp, late, scarred, hungry, and unannounced. No hymn accompanied their arrival. No noble declaration crossed the Vox. Their augurs tasted the battlefield, identified dying Imperial vessels, detected custodian encrypted signals, and isolated the cargo signatures locked within the ash storms below. On Purgatory's strategium, Captain Vineyard watched the hololithic projection of Loke 2, while officers murmured casualty probabilities. Primaris gene tech, Harkane said, his voice carrying a machine edge of desire. Confirmed by Vault radiation pattern, Custodian guard, Tyrannid engagement, fleet integrity collapsing. Castor stood nearby, helm beneath one arm, face scarred and impassive. They are dying. Yes, said Vineyard. Then the cargo is becoming available. Vineyard turned to the void display. Hive ships moved like predators around the dying convoy. Imperial wreckage burned among them. Engage! Purgatory's guns spoke without warning. Macro cannon fire hammered into the nearest hive ship, shell after shell punching through chitin and detonating inside the living hull. The creature convulsed, spilling digestive fluid and atmosphere from wounds large enough to swallow tanks. Lance batteries cut along its flank, carving glowing trenches through armor and muscle. Boarding torpedoes launched in clustered salvos, not toward enemy decks, but into biological cavities identified by Harkane's augurs as digestion chambers, spawning sacs, and nerve wells. The torpedoes burrowed into meat. Their ramps opened inside the hive ships. Marines' Malevolent kill teams emerged into wet darkness. They fought knee-deep in alien fluids, bolters roaring in chambers that pulsed like hearts. Tyrannid organisms birthed half-formed from walls and died before they touched the deck. Chainswords screamed through ropes of muscle and nerve fiber. Meltigans burned through internal membranes. Harkane's chosen thralls dragged plasma charges into place, while acid rain from the creature's own organs ate through their suits. None were extracted. Harkane detonated the plasma drives of the boarding torpedoes inside the Xeno's organs. One hive ship came apart from within, its belly bursting in a vast silent bloom of blue-white fire and cooked ichor. Another turned away from the convoy, wounded and confused, only to take concentrated macro fire through the ruptured cavity. Purgatory slid through the debris of its kill, shields crawling with spores, guns firing until the barrels glowed. Vineyard did not attempt to save the Imperial escorts first. He cut a path to the cargo. On Loke 2, the vilifiers came down in drop pods and fire. Castor's pod struck the basalt plateau, half a kilometer from the custodian position, crushing a cluster of Tyrannid gaunts beneath its impact. The doors blew outward. Yellow-armored warriors emerged firing. Their bolters tore through the swarm in disciplined bursts. Flamers washed the corpse ramps in promethium. Plasma guns turned warriors into bright silhouettes that collapsed as blackened bones inside splitting chitin. They did not reinforce the custodian ring directly. Castor saw the swarm pressure. He saw the wounded armsmen and Mechanicus survivors clustered near the vaults. He saw how the Tyrannids shifted toward movement, heat, weakness, blood. So he made weakness useful. "Drag the wounded east," he ordered. A surviving armsman stared through a cracked visor. "My lord?" Castor seized him by the back of his armor and threw him down the slope toward a shallow basin between two lava channels. "East." The vilifiers herded the wounded and half-dead into the basin. Some crawled, some were carried by serfs, some were thrown. Their screams drew the gaunts like scent on water. Tyrannids poured toward the basin in a living flood, clustering around the heat and blood. Then Castor marked the coordinates. Whirlwind rockets from Purgatory's surface landers and orbital guided munitions fell through the smoke. The basin disappeared in fire, taking the wounded, the dying, and thousands of Tyrannids with it. Chitin, human bone, armor, and volcanic glass fused together in a crater that glowed dull red. Asterion Val saw it from the gene vault perimeter. His face did not change. When the final Carnifex died at his feet, and the last of his wardens fell in pieces around him, the shield captain stood alone before the vaults. His auramite armor was cracked. His left pauldron had been torn away. One eye was closed beneath blood. His guardian spear was broken in half, but the blade end still burned in his hand. Vineyard approached through steaming Xenos corpses. Castor and the vilifiers formed behind him. Around them, Marines Malevolent finished the work, executing twitching Tyranids, stripping usable munitions from dead Imperials, marking vault locks, and stepping over custodian bodies they did not dare touch without order. Asterion Val raised the broken spear. "Stand away from the vaults," he said. Vineyard stopped. "The cargo is required for the prosecution of war. It is under custodian protection. Your protection is expiring." The custodian's remaining eye fixed on him with a force that would have made mortal kings kneel. "You will not claim this by scavenger right. Then name the right that opens it. Swear." Castor shifted slightly behind Vineyard. The captain of the Marines Malevolent inclined his helm. "By what?" "By the Emperor of mankind, by his throne, by the blood shed here. Swear that this gene tech will serve the Imperium and not your pride." For a heartbeat, only the volcanic wind moved. Halvek Mordain, watching the record years later from within a sealed Ordo chamber, expected hesitation. Some crack in Vineyard's contempt, some sneer at sanctity, some refusal dressed as doctrine. There was none. Vineyard answered at once. "I swear by the Emperor of mankind, by his throne, and by the blood shed here, that this gene tech will serve the Imperium." Asterion Val studied him. "You swear easily." "An oath is a weapon," Vineyard said. "This one opens a vault." The shield captain should have struck him down for that answer. Perhaps he lacked the strength. Perhaps he recognized honesty when it wore no ornament. Perhaps duty, at its end, cared only that the cargo endured. He lowered the broken spear. "Then take it," he said, "and be worthy of the burden." Vineyard gestured to Harkane. The Tech Marine and his servitors moved in. Vault locks were engaged. Cogitators awoke. Primaris gene tech, sealed in black caskets and stasis reliquaries, passed from custodian custody into yellow hands. Asterion Val died before the final casket was loaded. He remained standing until the last rune turned green. Then his broken spear slipped from his grip, and the Emperor's guardian fell to one knee, then forward, his blood spreading across the basalt among the ichor of the swarm. No Marine Malevolent spoke a right over him. No one had ordered them to. Halvek paused the record there. For a long while, he watched the frozen image of Vineyard standing over the dead custodian, the gene vaults behind him, Tyrannid corpses heaped across the volcanic plain, and the burning sky of Loke 2 above them all. He hated what he saw. He could not deny it. The Marines Malevolent had preserved the cargo. They had broken the hive ships. They had rescued what could still matter to the Imperium. They had saved the future of warriors not yet made. They preserved the Imperium in the same way a cauterizing iron preserves a limb, by burning away everything too weak to survive the cure. Aboard Purgatory, Harkane brought the first Primaris cogitator online beneath triple seals. The machine spirit resisted him until he threatened to gut its memory reliquary and mount its logic core inside a targeting servitor. Then, it accepted his authority with offended clicks and began the compatibility rite. Gene markers moved across the hololithic field. Chapter sample accepted. Lineage uncertain. Stability sufficient. Compatibility rising. Harkane watched in silence as the machine compared ancient data against the Marine's Malevolent tithe sample. Runes turned from red to amber to green. Then the cogitator halted. A hidden seal opened inside its logic stack. Letters appeared in cold white light. Match lost stock. For the first time since Archimedes Rex, Harkane did not threaten the machine. He only stared as the warning burned in the air, and behind him, in the apothecarian vaults, the future of the chapter waited in silence. Halvek Mordain built the accusation in silence. He did not build it as a priest built a sermon, beginning with certainty and gathering scripture to clothe it. He built it as an executioner, prepared a blade, testing balance, edge, grip, and the strength of the neck it would strike. Every fragment had to matter. Every seal had to hold. Every witness had to survive long enough to be useful, or die in such a way that the record of his death became testimony. The evidence lay before him in a sealed inquisitorial reliquary chamber aboard Purgatory, projected in layers of pale light above a table of black iron. Unknown Primarch origin, 11th protocol tags, hidden beneath administratum rot and ordo locks. The Macarian censure addendum, burned into Gethro's memory before the slate destroyed itself. The Archimedes Rex gene forge annotations, old enough to stink of the Imperium's earliest lies. Apothecary Sorn's encrypted progenoid irregularity, recovered from the dead of Emperor's deliverance and hidden from the chapter's own open archives. Eovac's visions of a father without statue, without name, without mourning rites. The Primaris cogitator warning from Loke 2, cold and clean and damning. Match lost stock. Gethro stood at the table's edge, pale, shaking, and half ruined by service. One eye had been replaced after the demonic incursion in the maintenance cathedral. The augmetic clicked whenever he blinked. His broken hand had been rebuilt into a brass-fingered data claw that moved faster than the flesh ever had. Pain had not made him brave. Fear had not made him loyal. Usefulness had kept him alive, and Halvek respected that more than courage. "My lord," Gethro whispered, "the conclusion remains probabilistic. All truth in the Imperium is probabilistic, once enough powerful men have been paid to bury it. The sanctioned record will reject the claim. The sanctioned record was written to reject the claim." Gethro's augmetic eye clicked. "Then what are we naming it?" Halvek looked at the assembled ghosts of evidence. Some flickered, some bled static, some carried seals that should not have existed outside vaults beneath terror. "We are naming what they feared enough to erase," he said. He touched the first rune. The hololith shifted. Lines of descent appeared, not complete, not clean, but suggestive in the way a blood trail is suggestive when it vanishes beneath a locked door. The Marines Malevolent did not fit easily into the sanctioned Primarch lines. Their gene seed did not carry obvious corruption. That would have been simpler. Corruption could be purged with flame, and flame was honest. Their markers were stranger than heresy, older, deliberately obscured, preserved through censure, crusade, scarcity, and bureaucratic starvation by hands that had never intended the truth to breathe. The conclusion was explosive enough to condemn worlds merely for hearing it. The Marines Malevolent may have descended from gene stock tied to one of the erased legions, not a renegade chapter wearing a stolen heritage, not some crude mutation spawned in the dark between founding records. Something worse to the Imperium because it was useful. Something preserved because no empire, however holy it pretended to be, threw away a weapon that still killed when aimed. The Imperium had not forgotten them. It had kept them deniable. Halvek sealed the reliquary chamber and summoned Vineyard. The captain arrived without haste, as if inquiries, accusations, and history itself were all required to wait upon the rhythm of war. His armor bore fresh scoring from the Loke 2 campaign, the yellow plate dulled by volcanic ash and Xeno's ichor. A repaired rent crossed his breastplate, where a tyrannid talon had almost reached the meat beneath. It had been patched with unpainted grey ceramite, the donor plate's former heraldry filed away, but not quite erased. In that, Halvek thought, the captain wore his entire chapter's soul. Castor came with him. Arcane too, red armor looming behind a thicket of servo arms. Turok stood at the door, with his bolter held across his chest. Eovac was not present. He remained chained in the Librarius vaults, half blind and half empty, his mind burned in places no apothecary could stitch. Halvek did not offer courtesy. Captain Vineyard, by authority of the Ordo Hereticus, and under the burden of evidence gathered across Armageddon, the Macarian archives, the derelict, forged ship Archimedes Rex, and the Loke 2 Gene Vault incident, I am placing the Marines Malevolent under formal inquisitorial interdiction, pending full review of lineage, doctrine, gene seed provenance, battlefield conduct, and possible contamination by prescribed pre-heresy stock. The words should have had weight. In another chamber, aboard another ship, before another chapter, they would have struck like orbital fire. They would have forced captains to kneel, serfs to weep, chaplains to rage, apothecaries to lock vaults, librarians to raise wards, and chapter masters to choose between obedience and damnation. Vineyard merely looked at the evidence, the hololith reflected in his red lenses. Halvek waited for awe, shame, denial, anger, some fracture in the armor of contempt. None came. "A father is a chain," Vineyard said. "We broke ours before we knew his name." Harkane's servo arms clicked once, softly. Castor said nothing. Halvek felt his fingers tighten around the rosette at his throat. "You admit knowledge of forbidden descent." "I admit nothing. I reject less." "Do you understand what this means?" "It means you found a corpse beneath a foundation and mistook it for leverage. It means your chapter may be born from a sin the Imperium ordered erased. Most Imperial foundations are. You are not listening. I am listening with appropriate concern." Halvek's voice sharpened, cold enough that even Gethro flinched. "You will surrender your gene vaults. You will submit your apothecarian to seal and audit. Your librarius will be placed beneath warded custody. Your companies will cease independent deployment. Your vessels will hold station and power down all non-defensive weapons. Your captains, sergeants, tech marines, apothecaries, chaplains, and command serfs will present themselves for interrogation under pain of excommunication and destruction." Vineyard tilted his helm slightly. "There is the Inquisition I recognize. This is not theater, Captain. No, theater requires spectators who matter." Halvek stepped closer. The chamber seemed to tighten around him. "I can call death upon you. Yes. I can declare your chapter excommunicate traitorous. Yes. I can bring Grey Knights, Red Hunters, Death Watch kill teams, Mechanicus reclamation fleets, Ministorum sanction, and the guns of every loyal vessel within astropathic reach. Yes. And still you stand there." Vineyard's voice did not rise. "Because you have not yet decided whether you can afford to lose us." The Vox shrieked before Halvek could answer. Every lumen in the chamber shifted to war red. Warning runes crawled over the strategium feed. Gethro flinched back as priority transmissions forced themselves through the sealed chamber walls, one after another, each tagged with frontline authority, naval distress, or astropathic panic. Hades' hive was no longer the center of the war. The war had widened. Orc remnants from the ash wastes had gathered under new warboss banners, not defeated, but drawn by the promise of bigger noise. Tyrannid splinters from the Loke 2 engagement had followed Void Spore through the subsector, dropping feeder organisms on agri moons, refinery stations, and troop convoys. Cult armies, chaos-tainted and long hidden beneath Imperial skin, rose in the confusion. They came from manufactorum depths and sump shrines, from penal transports and munition foundries, from regiments thought loyal, until their commissars were found nailed inside their own tanks, with 8-pointed stars carved through their ribs. 3 wars collided and became one. Across the subsector, billions moved toward death. Purgatory's strategium awakened around them, with projections bleeding into the reliquary chamber's evidence fields. The proof of forgotten gene stock became overlaid by a living apocalypse. Worlds flashed amber, red, black. Defense lines buckled. Naval pickets vanished. Astropathic relays went blind. Refugee fleets clogged translation points and brought tyrannid organisms with them. Orc fleets rammed through debris clouds, shooting at anything that glowed. Cult armies opened hive gates from within, while loyal commanders screamed for reinforcements that did not exist. Vineyard turned away from Halvek. The accusation remained hanging in the air behind him, suddenly smaller than the screams filling the Vox. "Command." "Deck," Vineyard said. "You are under interdiction," Halvek snapped. Vineyard did not stop. "Then interdict the Xenos first." The command deck of Purgatory was already a cathedral of controlled violence. Serfs ran data slates between stations. Servitors twitched in their thrones, mouths opening and closing around targeting calculus. Officers shouted over each other until Tuarok struck one across the helm hard enough to crack his visor and remind the rest that panic required permission. Arcane interfaced with the ship's wounded machine spirit through 3 mechadendrites, speaking in a stream of Binharic rebuke and praise. Castor studied surface projections with the stillness of a butcher choosing where to cut first. Vineyard took the command pulpit. Halvek followed him, fury dragging him more surely than duty. He saw the war unfold in full. The planet below was beyond salvation, as men used the word. 3 hive cities still stood within operational radius, though one had already lost its lower districts to cult uprising and tyrannid infestation. Another was being encircled by orc armor columns so dense that Auspex sweeps rendered them as geological movement. The third held millions of refugees, guard reserves, munition stockpiles, wounded from 6 fronts, and enough promethium to turn the horizon into a star if ignited. Imperial commanders filled the Vox. "My Lord Astartes, we require reinforcement at Hive Lethrian. Negative evacuation capacity. Civilian movement still underway. Orc armor breach imminent. Bioforms inside manufactorum levels. Cultist artillery firing from within loyal districts. Requesting confirmation of defensive doctrine. Requesting aid. Requesting mercy." Vineyard listened. Then he began to kill the map. "Collapse Hive Lethrian's lower transit arteries." A mortal general's voice cut in. "There are still workers below. There are tyrannids below. Collapse them. Flood Manufactoria 17 through 32 with promethium." "My lord, those Manufactoria contain guard reserves and civilian labor battalions. They also contain cult access routes. Open refugee columns through the Western Ash causeways," Vineyard continued. Halvek stared at him. "Those causeways lead toward the Orc advance." "Yes. You are doing it again. I am doing it larger." On the projection, yellow kill runes blossomed around moving refugee masses. Vineyard dragged them not away from danger, but through channels that would draw the Orc hordes into artillery convergence. He used fear as bait, population pressure as current, panic as the leash around an enemy too stupid and hungry to resist pursuit. "Reroute columns here, here, and here," he said. "Let the Orcs see movement. Let them smell weakness. When the mass commits, close the hive gates behind them and fire." A Lord General appeared on the primary Vox, his face grey with exhaustion and rage. "Captain Vineyard, I am ordering you to cease. Those are Imperial districts. Those are my headquarters evacuation routes. You do not have authority to expend my command structure." Vineyard looked at the flickering image. "General, if you obstruct prosecution of this war, I will place an orbital strike upon your headquarters and promote whichever subordinate survives with the sense to obey." The general went silent. Vineyard cut the link. Halvek seized the edge of the pulpit. "You threaten Imperial command. I threaten delay. You will drown this world in loyal blood. The world is already drowning. I am choosing where the bodies dam the flood." The orders went out. Hive Lethrian died first. Charges placed in ancient transit arteries detonated in sequence. Underground avenues that had carried workers for centuries folded inward under mountains of ferrocrete. Entire lower districts dropped several meters as their supports failed. Tyrannid organisms vanished beneath the collapse, along with labor crews, medici stations, ammunition haulers, and thousands of men who had not known they were already part of the plan. Dust erupted from every vent, tunnel mouth, and shrine grate. Survivors emerged coughing blood into masks, clogged with pulverized stone and bone. Behind them, beneath them, the swarm was crushed into the dark. Then, the Manufactoria flooded. Prometheum pumps reversed. Sacred fuel meant for tanks. Flamers and engines poured through production halls, sump channels, generator corridors, and assembly vaults. Cult armies chanting praises to forbidden gods found their hymns drowned by the roar of burning chemical seas. Men ignited where they stood. Heretics ran as torches. Loyal guardsmen burned beside them, still firing through flame until ammunition cooked off in their hands. Demons laughing inside borrowed flesh became columns of black smoke when the fire reached them. The Manufactoria became furnaces visible from orbit, burning so hot the hive's outer skin glowed red. The orcs followed the refugees exactly as Vineyard had predicted. Millions of greenskins surged across the western ash causeways, roaring after the fleeing columns, firing into their backs, smashing aside wrecked transports, trampling the slow, the wounded, and their own dead. Gargants lumbered behind them, smokestacks belching, guns firing in joy rather than accuracy. Scrap banners vanished and reappeared through ash clouds. Drums pounded on vehicle hulls. The orcs did not see channels. They saw prey. They saw movement. They saw the promise of close killing. When enough of them had entered the kill zone, the hive gates closed. The refugees trapped outside screamed against adamantium. The guns opened. Earthshaker shells fell in curtains. Macro mortars turned the causeways into erupting chains of fire. Orbital lances struck beyond the orc rear, sealing retreat with glass trenches and molten craters. Whirlwinds rained death in bright arcs. The first gargant exploded when a defense laser cored its boiler stack and ignited the ammunition mountain bolted to its back. It vanished in a burning scrap storm that shredded 3,000 orcs and one refugee column in the same breath. The second gargant toppled sideways into a ravine, crushing tanks, greenskins, and hab pilgrims beneath its armored bulk. The third kept walking while on fire, its crew laughing through the vox until a Titan's volcano cannon removed its head and half the ridge behind it. Then, the Bio-Titans came. They rose from the ash storms like nightmares given mass. Towering tyrannid beasts strode on bladed limbs, their carapaces studded with weapon symbiotes, their throats pulsing with acids and plasma heat. Imperial Titans answered from behind hive walls, god engines of the Collegia Titanica walking with cathedrals on their backs and fury in their hearts. The ground between them ceased to be terrain and became judgment. A warlord titan named Belligerent Saint fired first. Its volcano cannon struck a bio-titan in the chest and blew a hole through it large enough for a thunderhawk to fly through. The beast staggered, ichor pouring in rivers, then kept coming. It slammed into the warlord's void shields and brought them down under a storm of claws, acids, and living artillery. The Titan's plasma annihilator fired point blank, cooking the beast's head inside its own skull. Another bio-titan struck from the side and drove a talon through the warlord's knee joint. The god engine fell slowly, like a cathedral deciding to die. Its reactor breached when it hit the plain, and dawn came early for everyone within sight. Guard armies vanished beneath green tides, not broke, not retreated, vanished. Whole regiments disappeared under orc charges, their banners swallowed, their vox channels filling with lasfire, screams, and laughter. Armored companies fought until orcs climbed their hulls and tore open hatches with claws, hooks, and chain blades. Tank crews burned themselves alive rather than be pulled out. Commissars died standing on turret roofs, firing bolt pistols into the mob until they were dragged down and beaten into paste against their own armor. Through it all, the Marines' Malevolent struck like yellow knives.
They did not hold lines unless a held line created a better kill zone. They did not rescue enclaves unless the rescued had codes, munitions, or strategic position. They dropped into command nodes, artillery shrines, shield generators, and breach points where one squad could alter the deaths of millions. Castor's vilifiers executed cult demagogues in front of their followers and left the corpses hanging from vox masts. Turok's squads purged tunnel mouths with bolter and flamer, shooting refugees who tried to push past them and clog the firing lanes. Harkane walked among burning guns and made them fire again by right, repair, or threat. Vineyard directed it.
All with the calm of a man arranging corpses into barricades. Halvek watched until hatred became clarity. The Imperium would not destroy the Marines' Malevolent, not for Emperor's deliverance, not for the Macarian Scar, not for Archimedes Rex, not for Loke II, not for the 11th wound hidden in their blood, not for the billions they would spend across the subsector like ammunition poured into a hungry gun, because they were not a deviation from Imperial logic. They were Imperial logic without the comforting lies. The Imperium preached that every soul mattered, then tithed them by the billion. It called mankind sacred, then fed psychers to the golden throne by the thousand. It named Space Marines angels, then made them from stolen childhood, surgical torment, and indoctrinated murder. It condemned cruelty when performed without ceremony, then sanctified the same cruelty beneath banners, bells, and high Gothic. The Marines' Malevolent had merely stripped the hymn from the act. Halvek returned to his chamber after the first phase of the grand slaughter ended. He did not know how many had died. The counters were still moving too quickly for even the cogitators to pretend at accuracy. Gethro waited by the astropathic receiver, face ashen. "My lord," the autosavant said. Halvek removed one gauntlet slowly. His hand shook, and he despised it for doing so. "Speak." Response from Terra. High Seal. Not routed through the Conclave. Not routed through local Ordo command. Direct authority. The chamber seemed to recede around Halvek. "Read it." Gethro's brass fingers opened the message cylinder. The parchment within had no ornament beyond the seals. No explanation. No signature meant for lesser men. Only command, clean and absolute. His voice trembled as he spoke. Terminate investigation. Preserve asset. Bury provenance. Halvek closed his eyes. Outside the chamber, Purgatory fired again, and the ship shook like a beast laughing in its sleep. Victory came to the subsector as a silence too vast to be mistaken for peace. The guns stopped first. Not all of them. No war in the Imperium ever truly fell silent. Somewhere, artillery still thudded beyond the ash horizons. Somewhere, promethium still burned through manufactorum veins. Somewhere, a last orc mob was being dragged down beneath Lasfire. A last tyrannid beast was twitching in the ruins of a refinery. A last cult priest was choking on his own blood while trying to finish the name of a god that would not save him. But the great guns stopped. The titans that remained upright locked their knees and vented steam into a sky black with soot. Their war horns did not sound in triumph. Too many god engines lay dead for that. One warlord had fallen across a trench system, its cathedral back broken open, its crew cooked in their amniotic thrones, its princeps fused into the command manifold, while still screaming orders to a machine that no longer had legs. A reaver burned beside a dead bio-titan, both giants tangled together in death, the Xenos beast's talons buried in the titan's torso, and the titan's chain fist still lodged in the creature's skull. 3 hive cities had been erased, not conquered, not evacuated, not saved, erased. Hive Lethrien had collapsed into its own transit arteries, taking tyrannids, workers, guardsmen, medicae, refugees, sump gangs, priests, and manufactorum crews into a single grave of pulverized stone and meat. Hive Joran had burned for 6 days after the Prometheum floods, its lower levels becoming a furnace so vast that men in orbit saw its glow through ash storms. Hive Basta had been cracked open by orbital fire when Orc Gargants breached the outer curtain and cultist artillery began firing from within its chapel districts. The official record would call the destruction-controlled denial. Men with enough rank to avoid the ash would call it necessary. Priests would call it sacrifice. The dead would call it nothing. They were beyond language. Billions had died. The tally cogitators failed twice trying to count them. Not because the numbers were too large for the machines, but because the categories kept changing. Civilian, combatant, penal auxiliary, hive militia, heretic, contaminated, missing, biomass consumed, biomass denied, corpse starch recoverable, corpse starch ash loss, soul accounted, soul unaccounted, records burned, records sealed, on the fields beneath the surviving walls of Hades. Hive, the Marines Malevolent, were already stripping ammunition from fallen allies. Yellow-armored warriors moved through the dead with the calm of harvesters. They took charge packs from guardsmen whose hands had fused around their laser guns. They cut grenade belts from corpses folded beneath tank treads. They pried bolter magazines from dead Astartes, too ruined to object and too valuable to leave unsearched. Chapter serfs followed with hooks, sledges, cutting tools, and wheeled carts. They moved quickly. The air was still dangerous. Ash fell in warm sheets. Pools of promethium burned blue in shell holes. Tyrannid feeder organisms twitched beneath carpets of corpses and sometimes sprang at the serfs, only to be crushed under yellow ceramite. A salamander's banner lay half buried in the mud beside a crater filled with black rainwater and blood. A Marine Malevolent stepped on it to reach a dead heavy weapon team. No one stopped him. Halvek Mordain watched from the observation blister of his gun cutter, the exactor of truth, and felt hatred coil inside him like a living thing. The vessel had been his before the investigation began, a lean inquisitorial craft with black armor, sealed archives, warded holds, and enough hidden armament to humble a pirate raider. It hung apart from Purgatory now, its engines warm, its astropaths chained into their choir alcoves, its transmission shrines awake and hungry. Gethro stood beside him, more machine than man now, his brass hand plugged into the reliquary lectern. The auto-savant had not slept. His augmetic eye flickered as it processed roots, seals, recipient hierarchies, and death probabilities. "My lord," Gethro said, "the order from Terra remains binding." Halvek did not look away from the battlefield. "Read it again." Gethro swallowed. His throat augmetic clicked. "Terminate investigation. Preserve asset. Bury provenance." "Yes," Halvek said. "That is what cowards sound like when given authority." "My lord, the seal is absolute." "No seal is absolute. The High Lords speak with the Emperor's administrative voice." Halvek turned then, slowly. "The Emperor does not whisper from behind redaction marks." Gethro looked down. The chamber around them held everything Halvek had gathered. Gene tithe fragments, 11th protocol tags, the Macarian censure addendum reconstructed from Gethro's own memory engrams, Archimedes Rex gene forge annotations, Sorn's hidden progenoid data, Iovac's recorded prophecy, the Primaris cogitator warning from Loke 2, testimonies, picked captures, vox logs, casualty maps, orders of fire, massacre fields dressed as strategy. The truth had been built. It was ugly. It was enough. Halvek placed his rosette upon the lectern. The machine spirit recognized him with a chime like a blade against glass. "Prepare total dissemination." Gethro's face went grey. "My lord, every Ordo archive within reach, Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Astartes, Ordo Malleus sealed contingencies, Deathwatch watch fortresses, Mechanicus gene vault monitors, Ecclesiarchal black libraries, Segmentum command, first founding chapter masters. That will be interpreted as defiance of terror. It is defiance of terror. They will kill us." Halvek looked back through the blister. Below, Captain Vineyard stood among the dead, his yellow armor blackened by war and victory. Around him, the Marines Malevolent walked through Imperial corpses like men through harvested grain. "No," Halvek said. "They will try to decide whether killing us is less inconvenient than hearing us." Gethro's brass fingers began to move. The first transmission locks opened. Purgatory answered with boarding torpedoes. There was no warning, no demand, no final courtesy between servants of the same carrion empire. The first torpedo struck the exactor of truth amidships, punching through the outer hull with melter heat and brute force. The impact threw Halvek against the lectern. Warning bells screamed. The observation blister cracked along its lower seam, void shutters slamming down before the air could escape. The second torpedo hit near the armsman barracks. The third struck the reliquary spine. Vineyard came through the breach himself. The exactor's stormtroopers met him in the black iron throat of Corridor 9, hellguns raised, faces hidden behind rebreather masks and courage. They fired in disciplined ranks. Hot-shot beams scored Vineyard's armor, burning black lines across yellow plate, cutting through parchment seals, melting old blood from his greaves. One beam struck his helm and snapped his head aside. He kept walking. His bolt pistol fired once, twice, again, each shot a thunderclap in the narrow corridor. Men burst under the impacts. One stormtrooper's chest opened backward in a spray of ribs and armor fragments. Another lost his head and half his shoulder, his body continuing to fire for 2 blind heartbeats before collapsing. A third was struck in the abdomen and folded around the detonation, organs splashing across the wall behind him. Turok followed, bolter held low, firing into the wounded to clear the floor. The Marines Malevolent did not charge. They advanced. Corridor by corridor, they turned the inquisitorial vessel into a slaughterhouse. Servitors tried to seal blast doors. Harkane killed the doors with scrap code before killing the servitors with a plasma cutter, their lobotomized bodies spasming as their machine parts overheated and their flesh caught fire. Inquisitorial guards formed a barricade behind a reliquary shrine and died when Castor's vilifiers breached the side wall instead of attacking the front. A crusader with a power sword struck Brother Kale across the breastplate and carved deep enough to draw blood. Kale headbutted him, crushed his faceplate inward, then broke his spine over the barricade rail. Gethro watched the massacre unfold across internal pict feeds as he worked. "My lord," he said, voice shaking, "they are cutting through Deck 3. Continue transmitting. Outer archive locks breached. Continue. They will reach us. Then send faster." Halvek armed every ward in the reliquary archive. Servo skulls unfolded needler arrays. Cherubim gun drones woke in their alcoves, their dead faces twitching as ammunition feeds engaged. Incense burners vented sanctified smoke. Purity seals fluttered in the heat of overworked cogitators. Data stacks rose around him in black columns, each one filled with sins that had been named, indexed, and preserved for the day they might become useful. He had served the Imperium all his life. Now he wondered whether service and complicity had ever been different things. The archive doors blew inward. Smoke rolled across the chamber. Vineyard entered through it like a verdict. His armor was scored and bleeding oil. One eye lens flickered. A stormtrooper's power blade was still lodged in his left pauldron, broken off at the hilt. Behind him came Harkane, servo arms flexing, red armor lit by internal fire. Apothecary Sorn followed in white plate stained by old blood, his narthecium open, instruments gleaming. Turok and Castor held the doorway, their bolters aimed past Halvek toward Gethro. The auto-savant froze. Halvek did not. He raised his Inferno pistol and fired. The beam struck Vineyard in the chest. For an instant, the captain disappeared in white heat. Ceramite boiled. The aquila across his breastplate blackened and cracked. Molten metal ran down his torso in glowing threads. Vineyard staggered one step. One. Then he came forward. Halvek fired again, but Harkane's servo arm snapped across the line of fire and took the beam. The limb vaporized from claw to elbow in a burst of molten metal and machine shriek. Harkane did not cry out. He released a stream of Binharic curses that made the archive cogitators stutter in fear. Turok shot Gethro. The auto-savant came apart against the lectern, brass fingers still twitching in the transmission port. Blood and machine fluid sprayed across the rosette. His ruined body slid down the console, leaving a red smear across the keys. The transmission status rune flickered. Not complete, not failed. Halvek backed into the heart of the archive, pistol still raised. Around him, data stacks burned where Harkane's scrap code had begun to bite. Screens filled with static. Parchment curls blackened. Skull reliquaries clicked their teeth as hidden cogitators died inside them. The air stank of incense, molten circuitry, blood, and old paper turning to ash. "You would murder an Inquisitor to preserve a lie," Halvek said. Vineyard stopped before him. Smoke rose from the wound in his chest plate. "No," the captain said. "I would kill an Inquisitor to preserve a weapon." "You are proof of everything rotten in the Imperium." Vineyard's head tilted slightly. "Yes." The answer struck harder than denial. Halvek's finger tightened on the pistol. "You are hypocrisy given armor. You call yourselves loyal while butchering the Emperor's people. You speak of duty while stripping the dead. You damn weakness because you cannot admit your own. Your chapter is the Imperium's shame made flesh." "No," Vineyard said. "We are the Imperium's honesty." The archive burned around them. Harkane interfaced with the primary data stack, his remaining servo arms plunged into sockets never meant for such crude violation. Scrap code poured from him like a plague. It crawled through the archive in jagged red strings, corrupting images, reversing seals, rewriting routes, birthing false copies and dead ends. The evidence began to rot in real time. Halvek turned toward the lectern. Sorn was already there. The apothecary caught Halvek's wrist with one hand. The strength was absolute. Halvek fired the pistol into Sorn's side, burning through white armor and into the flesh beneath. Sorn grunted, not in pain, but in inconvenience. His narthecium unfolded with a soft surgical hiss. Halvek understood a heartbeat before the blade descended. No. The monomolecular cutter took his signet finger at the knuckle. Pain flashed white through his arm. Blood spilled across the lectern. Sorn pressed the severed finger, still wearing the gene-locked signet ring, onto the authorization plate. The machine spirit accepted the flesh, because machines were faithful to procedure and indifferent to truth. Deletion protocols awakened. Halvek lunged, but Vineyard struck him with the back of one gauntlet. The blow shattered his jaw and threw him against a stack of skull reliquaries. They collapsed around him, ancient bone breaking beneath his weight. He tasted blood, teeth, and ash. His pistol skidded away into the smoke. Vineyard stood over him. Halvek forced the words through the ruin of his mouth. "Is it true?" The captain said nothing. "The lost Primarch, the erased legion, your blood. Is it true?" Vineyard's red lenses burned through the smoke. "It changes nothing. It changes everything." "No." Vineyard crouched, armor servos growling. "A father is a story told by those who need permission to exist. Our only living parent is war." Halvek laughed then, though it came out wet and broken. "You do not even want the truth. We know the truth. Then say it." Vineyard leaned closer. "The Imperium made us useful. The Imperium hated what it made. The Imperium buried the name so it could keep the blade. That is truth enough." The deletion runes turned green behind him. Halvek watched the evidence die. Not all of it, perhaps. Some fragments might have escaped. Some astropathic shard might have reached a listening archive, malformed, corrupted, dismissed as heresy or madness. Some first founding fortress might receive a packet of static and blood-stained metadata. Some Ordo vault might lock an incomplete warning behind 7 seals and forget why it had done so. But the accusation as a blade had broken. His life had built it. The Imperium had chosen not to swing. As his blood spread beneath him, Halvek saw the final truth with a clarity so pure it felt like revelation. The Imperium had not buried the Marines Malevolent because they were too cruel. Cruelty was the first language of mankind's empire. It was spoken in tithes, purges, penal legions, corpse starch, forced compliance, sanctioned extermination, and the daily sacrifice of souls to a throne that would never thank them. The Imperium did not fear cruelty, it feared mirrors. The Marines Malevolent revealed too clearly what the Imperium required to survive. They were loyalty without mercy, duty without honor, victory without comfort. They were the lie stripped of gold leaf, the angel without wings, the savior with blood under his nails and no interest in washing it away. Halvek looked up at Vineyard. "Monster," he whispered. Vineyard rose. "Asset," he corrected. Then he shot Halvek through the heart. Armageddon burned beneath yellow boots. The Marines Malevolent marched through the ash in the days after victory, hated by allies, feared by enemies, and needed by every commander with enough dead to understand necessity. Their armor was patched, scarred, and stained. Their bolters were reloaded with ammunition taken from the fallen. Their serfs dragged carts of salvage behind them. Their apothecaries carried gene seed in locked caskets. Their tech marines counted shells, seals, and machine parts. Their captains marked the next war before the last fires had died. No cheers followed them. No hymns rose. The guardsmen watched them pass with hollow eyes. The Salamanders turned away in disgust. The Black Templars tightened their grips on sword hilts and said nothing. Priests blessed the dead rather than the victors. Mortal commanders sent requests for redeployment while condemning them in private Vox channels. The Marines Malevolent did not care. They had never required love. They had never expected gratitude. They had preserved the Imperium again, and the Imperium, craven and holy and starving, had allowed them to continue. Far away, beneath terror, deeper than sunlight, deeper than public memory, deeper than the prayers of men who believed truth lived in cathedrals, a sealed archive updated itself in silence. No scribe witnessed it, no priest blessed it, no lord admitted its existence. A line of cold text appeared, remained for 3 seconds, and then sealed itself behind obedient darkness. 11th derived asset remains operational. Public record unchanged. Chapter origin unknown.